My name is Rebecca, 33 years old, and my family just handed me the weapon I need to destroy them. I was sitting in my beat-up 2015 Honda Civic outside my parents' sprawling $1.2 million Atlanta suburban home when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my Aunt Carol. The message simply said, "I think you need to see this." They sent it to the wrong group chat. I tapped the screen and my blood went ice cold. The video opened on my parents, Thomas and Brenda, standing in their massive custom kitchen. The marble countertops were covered with expensive Thanksgiving catering. They were holding crystal flutes filled with premium champagne. Beside them stood my older sister Samantha and her husband Terrence. Terrence is an African-American man who loves to play the part of a high-rolling real estate mogul. He was wearing a flashy tailored designer suit that probably cost more than my entire car, adjusting his gold cuffs, while my sister gazed at him adoringly. They were all laughing wildly, the kind of deep belly laughs you only share with people you completely trust. Then my father, Thomas, looked right into the camera, his face twisted into a cruel sneer. He said Rebecca is a pathetic failure. At 33, she is still doing freelance data entry. At least she makes Terrence look like a genius. The group erupted into laughter again. My mother Brenda took a delicate sip of her champagne, rolled her eyes, and added, "Thank God for Apex Holdings paying off our debts because that girl is absolutely useless." I sat in the driver's seat of my freezing car and watched the video 3 more times. I did not cry, I did not scream. I just smiled a cold, hard smile. You see, what my ungrateful parents and my arrogant brother-in-law did not know was that I am the sole owner and CEO of Apex Holdings, LLC. I am the anonymous benefactor who saved them from bankruptcy 5 years ago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your true worth. Growing up in this family meant you were only as valuable as the status you could provide. My parents worshipped appearances. When they lost everything due to their own reckless spending 5 years ago, I could not bear to see them thrown out on the street. But I also knew that if I handed them my hard-earned money directly, they would treat me like an open bank account and drain me dry while still treating me like garbage. So I used my background as a senior financial risk analyst to create Apex Holdings. I quietly bought their debt. I anonymously paid their mortgage, their property taxes, and their utility bills through secure corporate accounts. To keep the peace and protect my own mental health, I played the role of the struggling freelance data entry clerk perfectly. I drove this rusted Honda Civic. I lived in a tiny, unimpressive apartment. I wore thrift store clothes to their lavish gatherings. I did it all so they could keep their pride and I could keep my boundaries. And how did they repay my silent generosity? By using my fake poverty as a punchline to elevate Terrence. Terrence, who had never closed a legitimate business deal in his life. Terrence, who leased luxury cars and bought designer suits on credit, while my company secretly kept a roof over his head and my parents' heads. The sheer audacity of it burned in my chest. They were toasting to my failure while drinking champagne bought in a house I paid for. My mother called me useless while standing under a roof secured by my signature. My father called me pathetic while praising a man who was nothing but a walking illusion of wealth. I looked at the steering wheel of my humble car, feeling a profound sense of clarity. For years I had tolerated their sideways glances, their heavy sighs when I walked into a room, and their constant, unsolicited advice about how I needed to get my life together. I had absorbed all their financial burdens so they could sleep soundly at night, only to discover that their favorite pastime was mocking my supposed misery. I locked my phone and slipped it into the pocket of my cheap winter coat. Today was Thanksgiving. I looked through my windshield at the massive double doors of their home, framed by seasonal autumn wreaths and expensive decorations. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the mysterious Apex Holdings was just some faceless corporate angel that would fund their extravagant lifestyle forever. I stepped out of my car, the crisp November wind hitting my face. I walked up the long paved driveway, my inexpensive boots crunching heavily against the immaculate gravel. I could hear the faint sound of smooth jazz music and boisterous laughter spilling from the dining room windows. They were in there right now, celebrating a life they did not earn, mocking the very person who held the deed to their comfort. I reached the front porch and stood before the heavy oak door. I took one deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs, completely washing away the last remaining ounce of daughterly guilt I possessed. I pressed the glowing doorbell. It was time to join the party and see exactly how far they were willing to push the girl they thought had nothing. I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped into the grand foyer. The air was thick with the smell of roasted turkey, expensive sage stuffing, and the overwhelming scent of my mother's signature designer perfume. The boisterous laughter I had heard from the driveway died the second my cheap boots squeaked against the polished marble floor. My Aunt Carol offered a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile from the hallway, but the rest of the room simply stared. Thomas cleared his throat, adjusting the collar of his cashmere sweater, while Samantha blatantly looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the frayed cuffs of my generic winter coat. No one said Happy Thanksgiving, no one offered to take my coat. I hung it up myself and walked directly into the formal dining room, taking the only empty seat at the far end of the long mahogany table. Before I could even unfold my linen napkin, the attack began. There was no small talk about the weather or my health. Terrence leaned across the table, his gold Rolex catching the light of the crystal chandelier overhead. He did not pass me a plate of food. Instead, he slid a thick, glossy real estate brochure and a stapled stack of legal documents across the polished wood. The papers stopped right in front of my empty dinner plate. I looked down. It was a commercial loan application. I looked back up at Terrence, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "What is this?" I asked quietly. Terrence let out a condescending chuckle, exchanging a knowing glance with my sister. "It is a golden opportunity for you to finally pull your weight around here, Becca," he said, leaning back in his custom-upholstered chair. "I am closing a massive deal on a luxury condo project downtown. Top-tier stuff probably over your head. But the bank is playing hardball with the liquidity requirements. I am exactly $50,000 short on the earnest money deposit. I just need a clean social security number to co-sign a short-term bridge loan." I stared at him, genuinely amazed by his audacity. "You want me to take out a $50,000 loan for you?" I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Terrence scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Do not act like it is a big deal. You have zero debt because you have zero assets. Your credit file is a ghost town. The bank will approve it based on my projected collateral. Besides, what do you have to lose? It is not like your freelance data entry gig is ever going to buy you a house. You live in a shoebox. This is your chance to actually contribute to the family legacy instead of just showing up to eat our food." I looked over at my father, expecting him to intervene. Instead, Thomas was busy carving the turkey, nodding in agreement with Terrence. "He is right, Rebecca," my father muttered without looking up. "You have been floating through life doing absolutely nothing. Terrence is building an empire. The least you can do is put your name on a piece of paper to help him secure this property." Samantha leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the stem of her wineglass. "Honestly, Becca, it is incredibly selfish of you to even hesitate. Do you have any idea how much this family has done for you? I have been giving you my hand-me-down designer clothes for years, just so you do not look like a complete vagrant when you go to the grocery store. Terrence is offering to let you be part of something big. When the project pays off, maybe he will even toss you a few $1,000s so you can upgrade that pathetic car parked in our driveway." The sheer delusion in her voice was almost intoxicating. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that I had indirectly paid for when I covered their property taxes last spring. Then came the final blow. My mother Brenda picked up her silver butter knife and tapped it sharply against her crystal water goblet. The sharp clinking sound silenced the entire table. She fixed her cold, piercing eyes on me. "We are not having a debate about this, Rebecca. You are going to pick up that pen, you are going to write down your social security number, and you are going to sign on the dotted line." This family is finally bouncing back after the bankruptcy, and I will not allow your stubborn, poverty-stricken mindset to hold Terrence back. You owe us for raising you. Now sign the papers so we can enjoy our dinner in peace." The silence in the room was absolute. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me, expecting me to crumble, expecting the weak, compliant girl who always kept her head down to simply obey. I looked at the loan document. I saw the blank space for the guarantor signature. I looked at the glossy brochure filled with fake architectural renderings. Then I reached out and picked up my crystal water goblet. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the ice-cold water. I set the glass down gently, making sure it did not make a single sound. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I looked Terrence dead in the eye and offered a pleasant customer service smile. "I do not think so," I said calmly. "Have a wonderful Thanksgiving." The collective gasp of shock was like music to my ears. "Wait, where do you think you are going?" My mother screeched, her carefully crafted, elegant facade shattering instantly. "Get back here right now, you ungrateful brat!" I did not turn around. I walked out of the dining room, grabbed my cheap winter coat from the hallway hook, and walked right out the heavy oak front door. The cold November wind hit me again, but this time it felt incredibly refreshing. I walked down the long gravel driveway, ignoring the muffled shouts coming from inside the house. I climbed into the driver's seat of my freezing Honda Civic and locked the doors. I did not start the engine right away. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened my encrypted banking application, bypassing the standard login with my biometric security key. The screen loaded, displaying the massive 8-figure portfolio of Apex Holdings LLC. I navigated to the Automated Disbursements tab. There they were. The scheduled monthly payments that kept their perfect suburban illusion alive. The $4,000 mortgage payment. The $800 utility bundle. The landscaping fees. The country club dues? I selected the master file labeled Thomas and Brenda Residence. A warning prompt popped up on the screen, asking me to confirm the cancellation of all linked recurring transfers. I stared at the word confirm. I thought about the $50,000 loan application sitting next to my empty plate. I thought about the video of them laughing at my expense. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I pressed my thumb against the screen. The status bar flashed green. Autopay canceled. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, started the ignition, and drove away from the $1.2 million house they were about to lose. 2 weeks passed in absolute silence. I did not receive a single text message or voicemail from my parents or my sister. In their minds, giving me the silent treatment was a severe punishment. They assumed I was sitting in my tiny apartment agonizing over my decision to walk out on Thanksgiving dinner, just waiting for the moment they would graciously allow me to apologize to them. They had no idea I was sleeping better than I had in 5 years. The first financial tremor hit on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee and reviewing quarterly projection reports for my actual corporate clients when my phone screen violently lit up. It was my mother. The caller ID flashed a picture of Brenda from last year's country club gala, draped in expensive pearls that I had indirectly paid for. I took a slow sip of my coffee, let it ring 3 times, and calmly answered. I did not even get the chance to say hello. "Rebecca, what kind of dark curse have you brought upon this family?" Brenda shrieked into the receiver. Her voice was shrill, echoing with absolute panic and completely devoid of her usual refined country club tone. I held the phone an inch away from my ear. "I am standing at the register inside the Gucci boutique at Phipps Plaza. Do you have any idea how completely humiliating this is? I just tried to buy a simple python leather handbag, and the cashier told me my premium platinum card was declined." Declined, Rebecca. In front of Diane and Susan. I listened to her hyperventilate, my face completely expressionless. I knew exactly why her card was declined. The platinum credit card was tied to a joint checking account that relied heavily on the monthly cash infusions from Apex Holdings to cover its exorbitant balances. When I canceled the auto pay 2 weeks ago, the account dried up completely. Their automatic payments for luxury car insurance, country club membership dues, and high-end grocery deliveries had likely triggered a rapid cascade of overdraft fees. The bank had simply cut them off without warning. "Are you even listening to me?" My mother screamed, the sound of her frantic pacing clearly audible through the speaker. The sales associate looked at me like I was some kind of street beggar. She actually had the nerve to ask me if I had another form of payment. Me. I am the chair of the annual charity gala, and this little retail worker asked me for a backup card. "This is all your fault, you ungrateful little wretch." I set my coffee mug down on the counter. "My fault," I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "How exactly is your maxed out credit card my fault, Mother?" "Because you carry this disgusting poverty mindset wherever you go," she spat back venomously. "Ever since you selfishly walked out on Thanksgiving and refused to help Terrence with his real estate project, everything has been going wrong. Your father's business accounts are suddenly frozen. The mortgage portal says our payment was returned. You brought this bad karma into our lives. You are a black cloud, Rebecca. You infect us with your cheap, low-class energy. If you had just signed that piece of paper like a good daughter, the universe would not be punishing us right now. You need to wire me $3,000 immediately so I can pay for this bag and salvage my reputation. Go to a payday loan place if you have to." I stared at the blank wall of my apartment, letting her insane logic wash over me. She was standing in a luxury boutique, holding a python skin bag she absolutely could not afford, demanding her supposedly impoverished daughter take out a predatory loan to save her social standing. It was the purest distillation of their absolute financial incompetence. I did not yell back. I did not try to explain that Apex Holdings had cut the cord. Let the universe take the credit for a little while longer. I took a deep breath and spoke directly into the microphone. "Put the bag back on the shelf, Mother," I said coldly, "and do not ever call me to fix your messes again." Before she could utter another screeching syllable, I pressed the red button and ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the counter and watched it vibrate seconds later as she desperately tried to call back. I simply muted the device. The silence in my apartment returned thick and incredibly peaceful. But the morning was far from over. Less than 10 minutes after I hung up on Brenda, my secure encrypted laptop chimed with a high-priority notification. I opened the Apex Holdings administrative dashboard. A flashing red alert dominated the center of the screen. It was a notice from the commercial auto lending division of a major national bank. The alert detailed a severe delinquency regarding a commercial lease for a brand new luxury Range Rover. The primary lessee was a shell corporation registered directly to Terrence. I clicked on the digital file and smiled. When Terrence had leased that $100,000 vehicle to maintain his phony image as a highly successful real estate investor, his personal credit had been far too damaged to actually secure the loan. He had manipulated my father into asking Apex Holdings to act as a silent corporate guarantor. Since I was playing the role of the benevolent anonymous savior at the time, I had authorized the guarantee just to keep the peace. The lease payments were supposed to be automatically drafted from Terrence's business account every single month. The dashboard displayed the brutal truth. Terrence's account had non-sufficient funds. His massive monthly payment had bounced. And because I had severed the financial lifeline to my parents' overarching accounts, they could not bail him out either. The banking system was now asking Apex Holdings as the guarantor to cover the $2,000 monthly payment to prevent the vehicle from going into default. Terrence was an absolute fraud. His designer suits, his luxury SUV, his arrogant lectures about building an empire, it was all built on a foundation of sand funded entirely by my silent grace. And now the tide was rushing in. The bank system presented me with two clickable options. The first was to authorize the transfer and cover Terrence's missed payment. The second was to officially decline the guarantor intervention, which would immediately breach the lease contract and send the file directly to the bank's asset recovery division. I thought about the Thanksgiving table. I thought about Terrence demanding my social security number, mocking my tiny apartment, and telling me I had zero assets. I thought about my sister Samantha laughing at my frayed winter coat while wearing diamonds I essentially paid for. I moved my digital mouse over the second option. I clicked decline. A bright green checkmark appeared confirming that Apex Holdings was officially washing its hands of the lease. The contract was nullified. The Range Rover was no longer legally his. The vehicle was now officially flagged for immediate repossession. The dominoes were falling faster than I had anticipated, and I was going to enjoy watching every single one of them crash to the ground. I closed the laptop, letting the satisfaction settle deep in my chest, but the quiet peace of my morning was abruptly shattered. A violent rhythmic pounding echoed through my small living room. Someone was hammering their fists against my front door, aggressively rattling the cheap brass deadbolt. I glanced at the digital clock on my microwave. It was barely noon. I walked over to the peephole and looked through the scratched glass. Terrence and Samantha were standing in the narrow, dimly lit hallway of my apartment building. Terrence looked absolutely enraged, his face flushed with anger, while Samantha stood behind him with her arms crossed, a look of utter disgust plastered across her perfectly contoured face. I unlocked the deadbolt and slowly pulled the door open. Before I could even say a word, Terrence shoved his way past me, stepping right onto my faded entryway rug in his expensive Italian loafers. "What the hell is wrong with you, Becca?" Terrence barked, his voice booming uncomfortably loud in my small space. "Are you completely devoid of any human empathy?" My parents are sitting in their kitchen right now, practically in tears. Their mortgage payment just bounced. Every single utility bill they have was returned for non-sufficient funds. That anonymous benefactor who has been keeping them afloat just randomly pulled the plug, and they are completely panicking. I stood by the open door, keeping my posture relaxed and my face impassive. "Oh," I said simply, "that sounds incredibly stressful." Terrence threw his hands in the air, his heavy gold Rolex flashing aggressively in the poor lighting of my apartment. "Stressful. It is an absolute disaster. And where were you when Brenda called you crying this morning? You hung up on her. You hung up on your own mother when she was having a massive financial crisis. You are the most selfish person I have ever met. They are drowning and you are just sitting here in this dump. You need to go to your bank right now, drain whatever pathetic savings account you have, and wire them the cash to cover the mortgage. It is the absolute least you can do after ruining our Thanksgiving dinner and refusing to help me with my business loan." Samantha stepped into the doorway, refusing to actually cross the threshold, as if my apartment was somehow contagious. She looked around my modest living room, sneering at my second-hand sofa, the simple bookshelf, and the small, basic television set. "Honestly, Becca, I do not know how you live in this roach motel." Samantha sneered, her eyes scanning the cracked paint on the ceiling and the worn carpet. "It smells like cheap cooking oil and failure in here. You have literally nothing going for you. No assets, no husband, no real career. The only useful thing you could possibly do with your miserable existence is empty your bank account to help the family that actually has a legacy to protect. Terrence has major investors coming into town this week, and we cannot have my parents losing their house and embarrassing us. We need cash today, and we know you have at least a few thousand hoarded away." I listened to them hurl their venomous insults, their voices dripping with that familiar toxic entitlement. They were standing in my home, demanding I drain my life savings to patch the holes in a sinking ship they themselves had torpedoed. But I did not argue. I did not defend my apartment or explain my career. I did not tell them that my supposed roach motel was a strategic choice to stay off the radar of leeches exactly like them. Instead, I looked past Samantha straight through the open doorway and out the large window at the end of the hallway that overlooked the busy street below. Parked right next to a bright red fire hydrant in a strictly enforced tow zone was Terrence's pristine white Range Rover, the exact same luxury SUV I had just legally flagged for immediate repossession less than 20 minutes ago. The irony was so rich and delicious I could practically taste it. They had driven a stolen vehicle to my apartment to demand I hand over my own hard-earned money to save their fake, crumbling empire. Terrence was acting like a billionaire while defaulting on a car note he could never afford in the first place. I turned my attention back to Terrence, offering him a cold, empty smile. I am not giving you or my parents a single dime, I said, my voice completely steady and firm. I suggest you tell them to sell some of those designer handbags and golf clubs to cover the mortgage. Terrence scoffed, his face twisting into an ugly mask of pure disdain. He shook his head in disgust. You really are a pathetic failure, he spat, stepping back out into the hallway and intentionally scuffing his shoe against my rug. Enjoy rotting in this roach motel for the rest of your life. Do not bother calling us when you finally realize you have nobody left. Samantha gave me one last look of absolute contempt before turning on her heel. Let us go, Terrence. She is completely useless. We are wasting our precious time with a lost cause. I watched them march down the hallway, their angry, self-righteous footsteps echoing against the cheap linoleum floor. I calmly closed my front door and locked the deadbolt. I walked straight over to the large window in my living room and looked down at the street. Terrence and Samantha were climbing into the Range Rover, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine hovering directly over their heads. They sped off illegally, cutting into traffic and leaving a cloud of exhaust in their wake. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my secure encrypted contact list. I bypassed my regular business associates and tapped a special priority number for a premium asset recovery agency I frequently used for high-level corporate defaults. A gruff professional voice answered on the second ring. Hello, this is Rebecca from Apex Holdings, I said, leaning against the cold windowsill and watching the traffic below. I have an immediate recovery order for a white Range Rover license plate number Alpha Tango 492. The commercial lease has been officially breached due to non-payment, and all corporate guarantor backing has been permanently revoked. The vehicle is currently mobile, heading back toward the downtown financial district. I need your absolute best repo men on it immediately. Track the onboard GPS system and hook it up the very second he parks. Do not give him an inch to negotiate. I want that car secured today. Consider it done, ma'am, the voice replied sharply. I hung up the phone, the cold smile returning to my face. Terrence thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn a very public, very humiliating lesson about exactly who owned the ground he walked on. Less than an hour later, the scene at the Oakmont Valley Country Club was a picture of serene, upper-class perfection. The afternoon sun beat down on the perfectly manicured 18th hole. On the elevated outdoor terrace overlooking the lush green fairways, Terrence was entirely in his element. He was holding court at a premium corner table surrounded by three wealthy local businessmen he was desperately trying to recruit as primary investors for his phantom luxury condo project. He had changed out of his morning clothes and was now wearing a pristine designer golf polo and tailored slacks. A bottle of incredibly expensive aged scotch sat in the center of the glass table, which Terrence had confidently ordered on a tab he could not possibly pay. Terrence leaned back in his plush patio chair, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. He was doing what he did best, spinning an elaborate web of financial lies. He spoke loudly, ensuring that the neighboring tables could hear his performance. Gentlemen, the downtown market is absolutely ripe for the taking, Terrence boasted, flashing a charismatic smile. I have secured the primary zoning permits, and my team is ready to break ground. I am personally putting up the bulk of the equity because I believe in having skin in the game. Real estate is about vision. It is about capital, yes, but mostly it is about having the courage to execute when others hesitate. My portfolio has doubled in the last 2 years alone because I never backed down from a massive opportunity. The businessmen nodded along, sipping their drinks. They were older, established men who were initially drawn in by his flashy exterior and confident demeanor. Terrence had strategically tipped the head valet $100 bill earlier that afternoon, just to keep his pristine white Range Rover parked directly in front of the main clubhouse entrance, right at the bottom of the terrace stairs. He wanted everyone walking into the country club to see the physical manifestation of his supposed success. He pointed his glass toward the driveway below. "You see that vehicle down there?" he said smoothly. "That is just the daily driver. When you reach my level of liquidity, you stop worrying about the price tags and start worrying about the return on investment. As the investors chuckled politely at his arrogance, the peaceful ambiance of the country club was violently interrupted. A deafening mechanical roar echoed up the paved driveway. The polite golf claps and quiet conversations on the terrace suddenly stopped. Everyone turned to look. A massive industrial diesel tow truck, painted a highly visible safety yellow, came barreling through the wrought iron gates. It completely ignored the valet parking signs and roared right up to the main entrance. The truck idled loudly, blowing thick exhaust into the air, clashing completely with the refined atmosphere of the Oakmont Valley Country Club. Terrence frowned, gripping his glass. "What on earth is security doing?" he muttered, trying to maintain his composed facade. "They let absolute garbage trucks onto the property now. I should speak to the club manager about this." But the tow truck did not just pass through. It abruptly stopped directly in front of Terrence's gleaming white Range Rover. A large, burly driver in a heavy canvas jacket stepped out of the cab. He did not look like he cared about country club etiquette. The head valet rushed forward, waving his arms frantically in protest, but the driver completely ignored him. With practiced efficiency, the driver moved to the back of the tow truck and pulled a heavy metal lever. The hydraulic lift whined loudly, echoing across the terrace, as the metal arms lowered and slid directly under the front tires of the luxury SUV. One of the older investors leaned forward, squinting through the sunlight. "Terrence," he said slowly, "is that not your vehicle they are hooking up?" Terrence froze. The blood drained completely from his face as his eyes locked onto the scene below. Panic replaced his manufactured confidence. He slammed his crystal glass down on the table, spilling premium scotch across the glass surface. "Hey!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, completely abandoning his sophisticated persona. "Hey, get away from my car! What do you think you are doing?" He bolted away from the table, practically sprinting down the sweeping stone staircase that led from the terrace to the main driveway. The businessmen exchanged confused glances and stood up, walking over to the edge of the balcony to watch the spectacle unfold. Dozens of other wealthy club members had also gathered at the railing, whispering to each other as the drama escalated. Terrence burst through the glass doors of the clubhouse and ran out onto the pavement. "Stop the lift right now!" he roared, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "Do you have any idea who I am? I will sue you and your entire garbage company into the ground. That is a $100,000 vehicle. Unhook it right now before I call the police and have you arrested for grand theft auto." The tow truck driver did not flinch. He did not even look intimidated. He calmly finished securing the heavy chains around the tires of the Range Rover and locked the hydraulic lift into place. The front wheels of the SUV hovered a foot off the ground. Only then did the driver turn to face Terrence. He casually reached into the front pocket of his canvas jacket and pulled out a metal clipboard attached to a thick stack of legal documents. "Are you Terrence?" The driver asked, his voice loud and incredibly steady, carrying easily up to the terrace where the investors were watching. "Yes, I am, Terrence," he shouted back, waving his arms frantically. "And you are making a massive mistake. My accounts are fully funded. This is illegal. Unhook my car immediately." The driver stepped forward and shoved the clipboard directly into Terrence's chest. "I do not care about your accounts, buddy," the driver said loudly. "I have a direct order from the primary guarantor. This commercial lease has been officially breached due to non-payment and insufficient funds. Your backing has been permanently revoked." Terrence snatched the paperwork off the clipboard. His eyes darted across the page, scanning the legal jargon until he hit the bold letterhead at the top of the notice. Apex Holdings, LLC. The paper shook in his hands. The color drained from his face for a second time as the reality of the situation crashed down on him. Apex Holdings had not just stopped paying my parents' bills, they had systematically hunted him down. "There must be a misunderstanding." Terrence stammered, his voice suddenly losing all its booming authority. He looked around nervously, realizing that half the country club was staring at him. "Please, just let me make a phone call. Let me call Apex. I can clear this up in 5 minutes. I have the cash." "You can call whoever you want, but you will be walking while you do it," the driver replied coldly. He turned his back on Terrence, climbed back into the cab of the yellow tow truck, and slammed the door shut. The diesel engine roared to life once more. Terrence stood frozen on the immaculate driveway, completely humiliated, clutching the notice of default in his trembling hands. The tow truck pulled forward, dragging his prize status symbol down the driveway and out through the front gates, leaving an empty parking space and a cloud of exhaust behind. Slowly, Terrence turned around and looked up at the terrace. His three wealthy investors were standing at the railing. They were no longer smiling. They were not impressed by his hustle or his vision. They saw him for exactly what he was, a desperate fraud who could not even afford the car he drove. Without saying a single word, the senior businessman picked up his suit jacket from the back of his chair, turned around, and walked away from the table. The other two immediately followed suit. By the time Terrence walked back up the stairs, his table was completely empty, save for the spilled scotch and his shattered reputation. I was back at my kitchen island, calmly reviewing a risk assessment portfolio for one of my actual corporate clients when my cell phone started vibrating aggressively against the granite countertop. The caller ID flashed my sister Samantha's name. I let it ring twice before I swiped to answer. I did not even have the chance to bring the phone fully to my ear before her hysterical screaming filled my quiet apartment. "You vindictive, jealous little witch!" Samantha shrieked. Her voice was so loud and piercing that I had to hold the device away from my head. "Are you happy now? Are you proud of what you just did?" I kept my voice completely flat. "What exactly did I do, Samantha?" "Do not play dumb with me!" she roared, her breathing ragged and frantic. "Terrence just called me from the country club. He was completely humiliated in front of his primary investors. You called the police and filed a fake stolen vehicle report, did you not? You could not stand the fact that my husband was closing a massive real estate deal while you sit in your pathetic Roach motel doing meaningless data entry. You had his car illegally towed just to ruin his reputation. You are a disgusting, bitter person, Becca." I almost laughed out loud. The sheer level of their delusion was astonishing. Terrence had not told her the truth about the lease default or the revoked corporate guarantee. He had spun a frantic, desperate lie, blaming me for a fake police report to cover up his own absolute financial collapse. Before I could correct her, I heard the sound of a brief struggle over the phone followed by heavy footsteps. "Rebecca, listen to me very carefully, my father." Thomas boomed into the receiver. His voice was laced with a dark, threatening anger I had rarely heard. "You have crossed a line today that you cannot uncross. You have directly jeopardized this family's financial future with your petty jealousy. Terrence lost 3 major investors today because of your little stunt with the tow truck. Dad, I did not file a police report," I said, calmly stating the simple truth. "I do not care what you did," he snapped, cutting me off completely. "You are going to fix this. You are going to go to your bank tomorrow morning and you are going to take out a $50,000 personal loan. You will wire those funds directly to Terrence so he can secure a replacement vehicle and salvage his business deals. If you do not have the cash in his account by this Friday, you are completely cut off. You will be disowned. Do not call us. Do not show up at our house. You will no longer be my daughter. Do you understand me?" I stood in my kitchen, looking out the window at the gray afternoon sky. My own father was threatening to erase me from his life over a luxury car driven by a con artist. He was willing to throw me away to protect an illusion of wealth that I had been secretly funding. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. There was no going back from this, and honestly, I did not want to. "I understand completely," I replied, keeping my tone submissive and quiet. "I will bring the paperwork to the house on Friday." "See that you do," Thomas growled, and the line went dead. I tossed the phone onto the counter. I had promised to bring paperwork on Friday, and I fully intended to keep that promise. It just was not going to be the loan application they were expecting. But while I was mentally preparing my own legal documents, a much darker, far more malicious scheme was unfolding inside their $1.2 million suburban home. I would later learn the exact details of what happened that afternoon through digital footprints, court records, and family confessions, and the sheer audacity of it still astounds me. After hanging up on me, the panic in my parents' house reached a fever pitch. Thomas's empty threats to disown me could not stop the financial bleeding. The mortgage portal was still showing a past due balance. The country club was threatening to suspend their membership over unpaid dues. And Terrence was desperately pacing the hardwood floors, realizing his entire fake empire was crumbling around him. He needed capital immediately, not just to buy a new car, but to maintain the massive lie he had built his marriage on. He knew my $50,000 personal loan might not come through, or it might not be enough to save all of them. That was when my mother Brenda had a brilliant criminal idea. She remembered that she still kept all my old high school and college financial aid documents in a locked filing cabinet in the home office. Brenda convinced herself that she was completely entitled to my identity. After all, she had given birth to me. In her twisted mind, my credit score was simply a family resource waiting to be harvested. Because I had always lived a quiet, modest life, Brenda knew my credit score was absolutely pristine. I had no debt, no late payments, and a completely clean financial record. To them, my spotless credit profile was an untapped gold mine. Terrence and Brenda locked themselves in the home office. They rummaged through years of old tax returns and school files until they found exactly what they were looking for: my birth certificate and my pristine Social Security card. Driven by pure desperation and a breathtaking sense of entitlement, they booted up the family desktop computer. Terrence navigated directly to the online portal for the Small Business Administration. They did not just apply for a small personal loan to get by. They decided to go all in. Terrence typed my information into the federal forms with the steady hands of a practiced conman. He knew exactly which boxes to check to bypass the automated flags. Using my name, my date of birth, and my Social Security number, Terrence illegally submitted an expedited commercial loan application for $100,000. He falsified the employment records, claiming I was a silent equity partner in his real estate shell company. He checked all the boxes confirming identity and authorized the hard credit pull, forging my electronic signature without a single second of hesitation. Their plan was simple and entirely malicious. Once the $100,000 cleared into Terrence's account, he would use half of it to secure his luxury condo deposit and lease a new luxury vehicle. He would give the other half to my parents to catch up on their mortgage and country club bills. They figured that since I was just a lowly data entry clerk, I would never monitor my credit report closely enough to notice a commercial loan. Or worse, they assumed that even if I did find out, I would be too weak and intimidated by the family dynamic to ever report them to the authorities. They truly believed that family loyalty would force me to swallow the massive debt and let them get away with federal identity theft. They hit submit on the application, completely confident in their flawless crime. They celebrated in the kitchen, convinced they had just outsmarted the banking system and secured their wealthy lifestyle for another year. They had absolutely no idea that my encrypted financial monitoring software was already capturing the breach. The trap was set, and they had just gleefully locked themselves inside it. I was still sitting at my kitchen island when my secure laptop emitted a sharp, high-pitched chime. It was a sound I rarely heard. My custom-built financial monitoring software, the same system I used to track multi-million-dollar corporate accounts for Apex Holdings, had triggered a critical alert. I pulled the laptop closer and opened the encrypted dashboard. A bright red notification flashed across the screen, indicating a hard credit inquiry and a pending commercial loan application filed under my personal Social Security number. I clicked on the digital file, my eyes scanning the heavily formatted document. It was an application for a $100,000 small business administration loan. The primary applicant was listed as me, but the receiving bank account belonged to a shell company registered directly to Terrence. The software did not just alert me to the fraud, it actively tracked the origin of the digital footprint. I ran a quick trace on the IP address that submitted the application. Within seconds, the geographic location pinged a very familiar residential address: my parents' $1.2 million suburban home. They had actually done it. My mother and my brother-in-law had conspired to steal my identity, They had forged my signature and committed federal fraud, entirely convinced I was too weak, too ignorant, and too poor to ever find out. Most people in my position would have panicked. Most people would have immediately called the major credit bureaus to freeze their accounts and stop the application dead in its tracks to protect their financial standing. But I was not most people. I was a senior financial risk analyst, and I knew exactly how federal banking laws worked. If I stopped the loan application right now, it would simply be categorized as an attempted fraud. They could try to spin it, make desperate excuses, or claim it was just a massive misunderstanding. Terrence would likely hire a sleazy lawyer to argue that I had given verbal permission, and my parents would back up his lies. I did not want a messy, prolonged family dispute. I wanted them locked away. I wanted undeniable, concrete proof of a federal felony that no amount of smooth talking or parental guilt-tripping could ever erase. I picked up my phone and dialed a direct, unlisted number I kept for high-level corporate emergencies. The call routed to a senior investigator at the Federal Bank Fraud Department, a man I had collaborated with on several large-scale corporate embezzlement cases through Apex Holdings. When he answered, I bypassed all pleasantries and quickly explained the situation. I sent over the digital logs, the IP trace, and the fraudulent loan documents through a secure encrypted portal. I told him exactly who submitted the application, where they were located, and the precise bank routing number they were trying to fund. Then I made my unconventional request. I asked the federal investigator not to freeze the application. I told him to let the automated system approve it and allow the $100,000 wire transfer to process entirely. I wanted the money to successfully hit Terrence's business account. The investigator hesitated for a moment, reminding me of the immense personal financial risk involved if the funds were dispersed. I assured him I had the capital to cover any temporary fallout and that Apex Holdings' legal team would manage the civil side of the breach. I explained my logic. Letting the wire transfer clear was the only way to definitively upgrade the crime from simple identity theft to aggravated federal wire fraud. Once that digital money crossed state lines and landed safely in his account, Terrence would no longer be dealing with local police. He would be looking at mandatory federal prison time. The investigator understood exactly what I was doing. He agreed to set the trap, flagging the receiving account to freeze the very moment the stolen funds arrived, ensuring Terrence could not actually spend a single dime of the money while the FBI built their airtight case. As soon as I finished coordinating with the federal agents, my phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed my Aunt Carol. I answered immediately. Her voice was hushed and frantic, sounding like she was hiding in a closet or a bathroom. "Rebecca," she whispered urgently into the receiver. "I am at your parents' house right now. You need to be extremely careful. I do not know what Terrence just did, but he came out of the home office with your mother a few minutes ago, and they are practically popping champagne." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice completely calm. "What are they celebrating, Aunt Carol?" "They are acting like they just won the lottery," she replied, her breath hitching with genuine concern. "Thomas is on the phone bragging to one of his country club friends about a massive sudden windfall. Terrence is pacing around the living room, talking about how his luxury condo project is fully funded and how he is going to go buy a brand new car tomorrow. Brenda is already browsing luxury vacation packages online. Whatever they did, Rebecca, they look entirely too smug. I am terrified they found a way to use your name for something illegal. You need to check your bank accounts right now." I listened to Aunt Carol's panicked breathing, touched by her genuine loyalty. Out of everyone in that toxic family, she was the only one who actually cared about my well-being. I smiled, looking at the blinking green light on my laptop that confirmed the federal authorities were now actively monitoring Terrence's bank account. "Do not worry, Aunt Carol," I said smoothly. "Let them celebrate. Let them drink their expensive champagne and plan exactly how they are going to spend that money. Let Terrence brag about his real estate empire. Just do me a favor and make sure you distance yourself from Terrence and my parents over the next few days." "What do you mean?" Aunt Carol asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What is going on?" "The windfall they are celebrating is not a winning lottery ticket," I replied, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp whisper. "It is a one-way ticket to federal lockup. Do not say a word to them. Just watch the show. I thanked her for the warning and hung up the phone. My parents and my arrogant brother-in-law thought they had just secured their fake empire. They thought they had outsmarted the system and successfully used me as their personal stepping stone. They had absolutely no idea that their triumphant celebration was actually a countdown to their own absolute destruction. All I had to do now was wait for the bank to process the wire transfer and hand the executioner the axe. The digital clock on my laptop flipped to exactly 8 in the morning. A secure email notification popped up on my screen sent directly from the federal bank fraud investigator I had spoken to the previous afternoon. The subject line was incredibly brief. Wire completed. Account frozen. I opened the message and read the short summary. The $100,000 Small Business Administration loan had officially crossed state lines navigating through the complex Federal Reserve System and had successfully deposited into Terrence's shell company bank account. The trap had officially snapped shut. By executing that interstate electronic transfer, using a stolen identity, Terrence had crossed the point of no return. It was no longer a simple case of family financial abuse or a local police matter. It was aggravated federal wire fraud. The investigator confirmed that the receiving bank account was immediately locked by a federal mandate. Terrence could log in on his phone and see the massive six-figure balance shining brightly on his screen. But if he tried to transfer a single cent withdraw cash or swipe his business debit card, the banking system would aggressively deny the transaction. He was a starving man locked securely inside a glass bakery. His fate was entirely sealed, and he was currently sleeping off a heavy champagne hangover in his luxury master bedroom, completely oblivious to the federal crosshairs resting squarely on his chest. While Terrence was deeply asleep, dreaming about his fake real estate empire and his stolen wealth, a very different reality was arriving at my parents' front door. It was a crisp, clear morning in their wealthy suburban neighborhood. The manicured lawns were covered in a light layer of frost. At exactly 9:15, a postal worker wearing a heavy blue jacket walked up their long, immaculate driveway. He was not carrying the usual stack of glossy fashion catalogs or country club newsletters. He was holding a thick, stiff cardboard envelope requiring a direct signature. My father Thomas, still wearing his expensive silk pajamas and a plush, monogrammed robe, opened the heavy oak door. He probably expected it to be a delivery of expensive cigars or a gift basket from one of his country club friends, congratulating him on the sudden family windfall they had bragged about the night before. He smiled politely at the mail carrier, signed the electronic datapad with a flourish, and took the heavy envelope inside. He carried it into the custom marble kitchen where Brenda was casually sipping her morning espresso and browsing luxury tropical vacation websites on her tablet, still riding the high of yesterday's stolen money. Thomas grabbed a silver letter opener from the counter and sliced through the thick cardboard seal. He pulled out a dense stack of heavy legal paper. The bold black letters printed at the very top of the first page instantly drained the color from his face. Apex Holdings, LLC, Legal and Asset Recovery Division. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. Brenda looked up from her tablet, noticing my father's hands beginning to violently shake. "What is it, Thomas?" she asked, her voice tight with sudden concern. Thomas read the first paragraph out loud, his voice cracking with sheer panic. It was a formal legal declaration stating that due to consecutive missed payments and the immediate revocation of all corporate leniency agreements, the entire remaining balance of the mortgage was now accelerated and due in full. They were not just asking for the missed monthly payments to bring the account current. They were demanding the entire $800,000 principal balance. If the funds were not secured and wired to the corporate escrow account within exactly 30 days, Apex Holdings would legally seize the property, evict the current occupants, and sell the home at public auction. Brenda dropped her espresso cup. It shattered violently against the marble floor, splashing dark hot coffee across the pristine white cabinets and her expensive slippers. The illusion of their untouchable wealth evaporated in a single devastating second. The mysterious corporate benefactor they had mocked in their Thanksgiving video was no longer paying their bills. It was aggressively repossessing their entire life. Absolute chaos erupted in the kitchen. Brenda began screaming hysterically, asking how this could possibly happen, demanding that Thomas fix it immediately before the neighbors found out and ruined their social standing. Thomas scrambled for his cell phone, his fingers slipping against the screen in his frantic rush. He dialed the corporate contact number listed at the very bottom of the foreclosure notice. He expected to easily charm some mid-level customer service representative, maybe yell a little bit about loyalty and demand an immediate extension. Instead, he was met with the cold, impenetrable fortress of my corporate phone system. "Thank you for calling Apex Holdings," a pleasant automated female voice chimed through the speakerphone. "If you are calling regarding a commercial acquisition, press 1. If you are calling regarding asset recovery, press 2. Thomas aggressively mashed the number 2 on his screen. The system routed him to another automated menu. "Please enter your 10-digit account reference number." He fumbled with the paperwork, reading the long string of numbers aloud in a desperate, shaking voice. The automated voice returned after a brief pause. "This account has been flagged for immediate foreclosure. All verbal negotiations are currently suspended. Please direct all inquiries in writing to our legal department. Goodbye." Thomas started shouting into the phone, demanding to speak to a human being. "Operator," he yelled, pacing frantically back and forth across the coffee-stained floor. "Give me a representative right now. I have the money. We just got a massive loan. We can pay the balance." But the machine did not care about his country club status or his silk robe. It simply automatically disconnected the call, leaving a flat, hollow tone echoing in the large kitchen. Thomas stood in the middle of his massive, expensive house, listening to the dead phone, finally realizing that he was completely powerless. He could not charm his way out of this situation. He could not bully a machine. He could not manipulate a faceless corporate entity. The walls of their perfect suburban fortress were rapidly closing in, and they were completely running out of air. It took exactly 4 hours for my mother to transition from absolute panic to calculated manipulation. I was sitting at my desk watching the real-time digital updates on Terrence's frozen bank account when my cell phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed Brenda's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, deep breath to steady my pulse before answering. I expected screaming. I expected her to hurl vicious insults and demand to know why I had not magically fixed their financial ruin. But the sound that came through the speaker was entirely different. It was the sound of heavy theatrical sobbing. "Rebecca," my sweet girl Brenda cried into the phone. Her voice was thick with manufactured grief, trembling with a perfect practiced vulnerability. "Please do not hang up on me. Please just listen. Your father and I have been doing a lot of soul-searching this morning, and we are just so incredibly heartbroken about how things have been between us." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, genuinely amazed by her acting skills. If I did not know that a massive foreclosure notice was currently sitting on her kitchen counter, I might have actually believed she was experiencing a moment of genuine maternal clarity. I kept my voice soft and neutral. "What is wrong, Mother?" "Everything is wrong," she wailed, blowing her nose loudly into what was likely a monogrammed silk handkerchief. "We have been so hard on you, Rebecca. We have been so blind. Your father and I were talking, and we realized that we let the stress of Terrence's business deals and our own silly social obligations cloud our judgment. We pushed you away. We said terrible things to you on Thanksgiving. We want to fix this. We want to be a real family again." I stared at the blinking green indicator on my laptop that confirmed the federal fraud hold on Terrence's stolen $100,000. I knew exactly what this was. This was the desperate pivot. They had realized they could not bully a faceless corporate entity like Apex Holdings into saving their house, so they were falling back on their oldest, most reliable strategy: emotional manipulation. "I am listening," I said quietly, offering her just enough rope to hang herself. Brenda sniffled, her voice dropping to a gentle, pleading register. "As you know, our 35th wedding anniversary is this weekend. We have booked the grand ballroom at the Downtown Plaza Hotel. It is going to be a beautiful evening with all of our friends and neighbors, but none of it will mean anything if our youngest daughter is not there. We want you to come, Rebecca. We want to publicly apologize to you in front of everyone. We want to show the world that we are united. Please say you will come and let us make amends." The audacity of her request was almost suffocating. She was inviting me to a lavish, wildly expensive party that I had unknowingly paid the deposit for through Apex Holdings, all to stage a fake public reconciliation while their entire world was burning down behind closed doors. They wanted me to stand there and smile for their country club friends, providing the perfect family optic to mask their absolute financial rot. "That sounds like a very big step, Mother," I replied carefully, keeping any trace of sarcasm out of my voice. "I will have to check my schedule." "Please, Rebecca," she begged, her voice rising in pitch. "Just come for an hour. Dress up. Let us take some nice family photos. It will mean the world to your father." I told her I would be there and ended the call. The moment the line disconnected, the fake emotional weight of her performance vanished from the air, replaced by a cold, hard truth. Brenda did not want to apologize. Thomas did not care about family photos. There was an ulterior motive driving this sudden, desperate olive branch. I did not have to wait long to find out exactly what it was. Less than 5 minutes after hanging up with my mother, my phone vibrated with a secure text message from Aunt Carol. The message was a massive block of text typed frantically and filled with urgent warnings. "Do not believe a single word Brenda just said to you," Aunt Carol wrote. "I am still at the house. Terrence just got off the phone with his bank. The $100,000 business loan he took out is completely frozen. The bank flagged the wire transfer for suspected identity fraud. They told Terrence the only way they will release the hold and allow him to access the money is if the primary applicant physically signs a retroactive authorization affidavit in front of a licensed notary to prove the application was legitimate. Terrence is absolutely losing his mind. He told your father he hired a shady mobile notary to attend the anniversary party disguised as a guest. Their plan is to corner you in the VIP suite before the dinner starts. They are going to use the party to guilt-trip you. They think if you are surrounded by 100 guests and all that family pressure, you will be too embarrassed to cause a scene and you will just sign the paper to keep the peace. They need that money to stop the foreclosure on the house. Do not go to that party, Rebecca. It is a trap." I read Aunt Carol's message twice. A slow, dark smile spreading across my face. It was not just a trap. It was an act of supreme, arrogant desperation. Terrence had committed a federal felony, realized he was caught in an automated banking freeze, and his brilliant solution was to ambush his victim at a luxury cocktail party and force her to legally absolve him of the crime. He actually believed that my fear of social awkwardness would override my own basic instinct for survival. He thought the heavy, toxic weight of family expectation would break me. I typed a quick reply to Aunt Carol. "Thank you for the warning. Do not worry. I am going to the party." I set my phone down and looked at my calendar. The anniversary party was in exactly 48 hours. My parents wanted a grand public spectacle. They wanted all their wealthy neighbors, their country club friends, and their fake high society associates gathered in one room to witness the perfection of their family. They wanted me to step into their carefully constructed stage, bow my head, and quietly sign away my identity to save their crumbling facade. I decided right then and there that I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would attend their lavish 35th anniversary party. I would stand in front of their 100 guests. But I was not going to sign a retroactive authorization form to save Terrence from a federal prison sentence. I was going to use their own beautiful, expensive stage to burn their fake empire straight to the ground. I had 48 hours to shed the skin of the pathetic failure they so desperately needed me to be. For 5 years, I had meticulously curated a wardrobe of faded sweaters, generic denim, and scuffed boots from discount clothing racks. It was a physical camouflage designed to protect my peace and keep their endless greed at bay. But camouflage was no longer necessary. I was going to war, and I needed armor. First thing Friday morning, I drove my beat-up Honda Civic to the wealthiest, most exclusive shopping district in Buckhead, intentionally choosing a location far away from my mother's preferred suburban boutiques. I walked into a private appointment-only designer atelier. The perfectly groomed saleswoman initially gave my thrift store winter coat a highly skeptical look, her smile tight and condescending. Her demeanor instantly transformed the moment I bypassed the clearance rack and placed my solid metal black card flat on the immaculate glass counter. I told her I needed an evening gown that commanded absolute authority. We spent 3 solid hours in the private fitting room, discarding anything that looked overly flashy or desperate. I finally settled on a breathtaking floor-length gown made of heavy midnight blue silk. It was structural elegant and unapologetically expensive. The resident tailor worked through his lunch break to ensure it fit my body with flawless razor-sharp precision. I paired the gown with authentic diamond drop earrings I had purchased years ago to celebrate my first $1 million corporate acquisition, but had never actually dared to wear in public. The physical transformation did not stop at the wardrobe. I hired a premium mobile styling team to come to my modest apartment on Saturday afternoon. It was a genuinely hilarious contrast watching two high-end beauty professionals carrying heavy ring lights and massive metal cases of luxury cosmetics up the poorly lit stairs of my supposed Roach Motel. They spent over 2 hours washing, blow-drying, and styling my hair into sleek polished waves that cascaded perfectly over my bare shoulders. They applied immaculate high-definition makeup that highlighted my cheekbones and gave my eyes a cold, piercing intensity. When they finally finished and packed up their expensive gear, I stood in front of the cheap cracked mirror attached to my bedroom closet door. The woman staring back at me was completely unrecognizable to the family that had mocked her. There was no trace of the quiet, submissive girl who kept her head down at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I looked exactly like what I was. The highly successful, unyielding chief executive officer of a massive financial holding firm. With my appearance perfected, I moved on to the most critical phase of my preparation. The ammunition. I sat down at my kitchen island and opened my encrypted work laptop. I did not want to leave any room for debate, confusion, or gaslighting when I finally took the stage tonight. I needed a presentation that was blunt, highly visual, and absolutely devastating. I opened a fresh digital slideshow. For the first slide, I imported the video Aunt Carol had forwarded to me. I ran the file through a professional audio enhancement program, stripping away the background jazz music and heavily amplifying my parents' and Terrence's voices. I wanted their cruel laughter and their vicious insults about my absolute uselessness to echo through the massive hotel ballroom with crystal-clear acoustic precision. For the second slide, I pulled the official corporate registration documents directly from the Georgia Secretary of State database. I used a bright yellow digital marker to highlight the bold text that read Apex Holdings, LLC, and directly underneath it, sole member and Chief Executive Officer Rebecca. It was the undeniable, legally binding proof that they had been living entirely on my silent charity. For the third and final slide, I compiled the ultimate kill shot. I took high-resolution screenshots of the fraudulent Small Business Administration loan application. I placed Terrence's forged digital signature right next to the bank's internal IP address tracking log. I drew a thick, bright red digital circle around the geographic ping that traced the illegal submission directly to the router inside my parents' home office. I added a small, crisp text box at the very bottom detailing the exact federal penal codes and mandatory minimum prison sentences for aggravated wire fraud and identity theft. I reviewed the 3 slides carefully. It was a masterpiece of absolute destruction. I exported the master file and reached into my desk drawer, pulling out a brand new, sleek red USB drive. The vibrant color reminded me of a hazardous warning light. I plugged it into the laptop and dragged the presentation onto the drive. I safely ejected the device and held it in the palm of my hand. It weighed practically nothing, yet it contained enough explosive truth to completely obliterate 4 lives in a matter of minutes. I slipped the sleek red USB drive into a brand new structured designer clutch that perfectly matched my midnight blue gown. I looked around my quiet, modest apartment one last time. This small space had been my sanctuary for years, a quiet refuge from their endless demands and toxic expectations. But tonight, I was finally closing the door on my double life. I did not bother grabbing the keys to my rusty Honda Civic. Instead, I opened a luxury ride sharing application on my phone and ordered a premium black car service. 10 minutes later, a pristine jet black executive SUV pulled up to the curb outside my building. The driver stepped out wearing a sharp black suit and opened the heavy rear door for me. I stepped into the plush leather interior, the smell of expensive car wax and new leather filling the quiet cabin. As the driver navigated away from my neighborhood and merged onto the highway, heading toward the downtown Plaza Hotel, I leaned back against the headrest and watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. My heart was not racing. My palms were not sweating. I felt no lingering anxiety or daughterly guilt. I had given them every opportunity to be decent human beings. They had chosen to be parasites. The trap was set, the stage was rented, and the executioner was on her way. The black executive SUV glided smoothly to a halt in front of the sweeping glass entrance of the downtown Plaza Hotel. A uniformed valet rushed forward to open my door, his eyes widening slightly as I stepped onto the red carpet in my heavy midnight blue silk gown. The crisp evening air brushed against my bare shoulders, but I felt absolutely no chill. I walked through the revolving doors and entered the grand lobby following the elegant gold-plated signs directing guests toward the Diamond Ballroom for the 35th anniversary celebration. The closer I got to the ballroom doors, the louder the hum of privileged conversation became. I paused just outside the entrance, taking a moment to survey the room before stepping into the Viper's Nest. It was a masterclass in superficiality. Over 100 guests were scattered across the massive room, sipping premium cocktails under dripping crystal chandeliers. I recognized most of them. They were the wealthy neighbors from my parents' subdivision, the aggressive board members of the local homeowners association, and the snobby regulars from the Oakmont Valley Country Club. Women draped in diamonds they likely could not afford were air-kissing each other's cheeks, while men in rented tuxedos boasted about their golf handicaps and fake investment portfolios. My parents had pulled out all the stops for this fake display of prosperity. Massive floral arrangements of white roses covered every single table. A string quartet played softly in the far corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to their massive lie. It was an incredibly expensive illusion funded entirely by a house of cards that was currently collapsing under the weight of federal fraud and imminent foreclosure. I adjusted my grip on my matching designer clutch, feeling the hard edges of the red USB drive inside, and stepped fully into the ballroom. For the first few moments, no one even realized who I was. Heads-turned eyes lingered on the expensive cut of my gown and the authentic diamonds sparkling at my ears, but there was no immediate recognition. They were used to seeing Rebecca, the quiet girl who stood in the background wearing scuffed boots and oversized sweaters, keeping her eyes glued to the floor. The woman walking through the crowd right now radiated a terrifying level of confidence. I glided past a group of my mother's friends, hearing their whispers of curiosity as I completely ignored their presence. I belonged in this environment far more than any of them did because my wealth was actually real. I did not even make it halfway across the room before my path was aggressively blocked. Terrence stepped directly in front of me, his tall frame clad in a tailored black tuxedo. At first glance, he looked like the perfect picture of success. But as I looked closer, I could see the absolute panic swimming in his dark eyes. A thin layer of sweat coated his forehead, catching the light from the chandeliers, and his jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He reached up to adjust his bow tie intentionally, flashing a massive brand-new solid gold Rolex on his wrist. It was a sickening detail. He had actually used the very first fraction of the stolen $100,000 loan to buy himself another piece of jewelry before the federal bank freeze completely locked him out of the account. It was the ultimate symbol of his reckless greed. He did not offer a greeting. He did not compliment my appearance or ask how I was doing. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and yanked out a folded clipboard, shoving it violently against my chest. "You are late!" he hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper so the nearby guests would not overhear. I took a half step back, refusing to touch the clipboard. "What is this, Terrence?" I asked, keeping my voice light and perfectly conversational. "Do not play games with me tonight, Becca," he snarled, his eyes darting nervously around the room to make sure no one was watching us too closely. "It is the retroactive bank authorization form. I brought a licensed notary. He is sitting at the bar right now. You are going to walk over there with me. You are going to show him your ID, and you are going to sign this paper confirming you authorized the business loan. We need to clear that freeze tonight." I looked down at the paper attached to the clipboard, then back up into his panicked, arrogant face. "And what if I do not want to sign it?" I asked calmly. Terrence leaned in close, his breath smelling heavily of premium scotch and pure desperation. "Sign this right now, or I am calling the cops immediately," he threatened, his voice dripping with malice. "I will tell them you committed commercial loan fraud. I will tell them you used my company computer to apply for the money because you are a broke, jealous failure trying to ruin my business. Who do you think they are going to believe? The successful real estate developer standing in a tuxedo, or the pathetic data entry clerk who lives in a roach motel? You will go to prison, Becca. Sign the paper and save yourself." It was a fascinating psychological display. He was trying to frame me for the exact federal crime he had committed against me. He truly believed he could bully me into legally covering his tracks by weaponizing my own identity. I looked at the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist, then at the clipboard in his shaking hand. Slowly, a cold, empty smile spread across my face. I reached out and took the clipboard from him. For one brief second, a wave of profound relief washed over his face. He actually thought he had won. He thought I was submitting to his demands out of sheer terror. Instead of walking toward the bar, I simply handed the clipboard back to him, pressing it flat against his chest, the exact same way he had shoved it at me. "I think you are going to need a much better lawyer, Terrence," I whispered sweetly. I stepped around him, leaving him standing frozen in the middle of the crowded ballroom with his useless legal document. I did not look back. I kept my posture perfectly straight as I navigated through the sea of wealthy guests, making a direct line for the raised stage at the front of the room. Tucked just beside the stage was the audiovisual control booth, where a young technician was currently managing the lighting and the background music from a massive digital soundboard. The trap was fully loaded. It was time to pull the trigger. I reached the small, dimly lit audiovisual booth tucked neatly beside the main stage. The young technician was wearing oversized headphones, sliding dials on his massive soundboard. I tapped him gently on the shoulder. He pulled one headphone off, looking at me with mild confusion. I held out the sleek red USB drive, placing it directly onto his control panel. "I need you to plug this into the main projection system," I told him, quietly sliding a crisp $100 bill right next to the drive. "There is a single video file and a short slideshow on there. When I pick up the secondary microphone on the stage and say the word present, I want you to dim the chandelier lights and play the video at maximum volume. Do you understand?" The technician looked at the $100 bill, then up at my expensive designer gown and diamond earrings. He gave me a sharp nod, sweeping the cash into his pocket and plugging the red drive into his laptop. "Consider it done," he whispered. I stepped back into the shadows near the edge of the stage and waited. A few moments later, the string quartet gracefully finished their classical piece. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, signaling the beginning of the formal program. The low hum of wealthy chatter quieted down as my father Thomas walked confidently up the short flight of stairs to the raised stage. He stepped behind the clear acrylic podium, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. My mother Brenda followed closely behind him, wearing a glittering silver dress that clung perfectly to her frame. She linked her arm through his, playing the role of the devoted, adoring matriarch to absolute perfection. "Good evening, everyone," Thomas boomed into the microphone. His deep, charismatic voice echoed flawlessly across the massive ballroom. "Thank you all for joining Brenda and me tonight to celebrate 35 years of marriage. Looking out at this incredible crowd, I am reminded of how truly blessed we are. We are surrounded by our dearest friends, our esteemed colleagues, and most importantly, our family. The crowd offered a polite, warm round of applause. Thomas smiled humbly, soaking in the admiration. He waited for the clapping to fade before continuing his performance. 35 years is a long time, he said, his tone turning serious and reflective. We have weathered our fair share of storms. We have faced economic downturns, personal setbacks, and the heavy burdens of building a lasting legacy. But we survived because we always put family first. We survived because we understand the value of hard work and mutual support. I stood in the shadows listening to the sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy flowing from his mouth. He was standing on a stage rented with my money, wearing a tuxedo paid for by my corporate accounts, lecturing a room full of millionaires about hard work. Of course, a legacy is only as strong as the next generation. Thomas continued, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed directly on Terrence and Samantha, near the front table. Brenda and I are so incredibly proud of our eldest daughter and our son-in-law. Terrence is currently closing one of the largest commercial real estate deals in the city. He understands what it takes to succeed. He understands that in this world you either contribute to the empire or you become a burden to it. Thomas paused, his gaze sweeping the room again. I could feel his eyes searching for me in the crowd, ready to deliver his public shaming. Sadly, not everyone grasps that concept, he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. Some people choose the path of least resistance. Some people are content to sit back, offer nothing, and feed off the success of those around them. But as a family, we must carry them anyway. That is the true burden of success. We love them even when they are a complete disappointment. A quiet, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the guests. They all knew exactly who he was talking about. Samantha smirked from her seat, raising her champagne glass toward her father. Terrence, however, was not smiling. He was staring at the floor, sweating profusely, knowing exactly what was waiting for him at the bank. My father had delivered his ultimate insult. He had used his grand anniversary speech to publicly label me a useless parasite in front of 100 wealthy socialites. It was the perfect cue. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly up the stage stairs. My midnight blue gown rustled softly against the carpeted steps. The guests in the front row noticed me first, their conversations dying instantly as they took in my appearance. I did not look like the pathetic failure Thomas had just described. I walked straight past my mother, who gasped audibly, her eyes widening in shock as she took in my designer dress and diamond earrings. I reached the secondary microphone stand, positioned on the far left side of the stage. I gripped the heavy metal stand, pulled the microphone from its cradle, and flicked the power switch on. A sharp, high-pitched whine of audio feedback pierced the room, causing several guests to cover their ears. Thomas stopped speaking instantly, his charismatic smile freezing on his face. He turned toward me, his eyes flashing with a mixture of confusion and intense anger. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" Brenda hissed at me through her perfectly applied lipstick. "Get down from there right now. You are ruining the speech." I ignored her completely. I turned my attention to the sea of faces staring up at me from the ballroom floor. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear through the massive speakers. "I am sorry to interrupt such a moving and beautifully written tribute to family values. My father is absolutely right. A family legacy is built on sacrifice, hard work, and financial transparency." Thomas gripped the edges of his clear acrylic podium, his knuckles turning completely white. "Rebecca, put the microphone down," he commanded in a low, threatening tone. "We will discuss whatever this is at home. But we are all here right now, Dad," I replied smoothly, offering him a cold, empty smile. "And since you just spent the last 5 minutes talking about the importance of contributing to the family empire, I thought this would be the perfect moment to share my contribution. I know I have always been the quiet one, the daughter who supposedly brings nothing to the table. So to celebrate your 35th anniversary, I brought a special present for the whole family to see." I turned my head slightly toward the audiovisual booth and made direct eye contact with the young technician. He had his hand resting firmly on the control board, waiting for the signal. The entire ballroom was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the carpeted floor. "Let us take a look at the real family legacy," I said clearly into the microphone. Play the present. The technician hit the button. The massive crystal chandeliers above us immediately dimmed to black. The giant LED projection screens flanking the stage flickered to life. The trap was sprung. The twin screens flanking the stage illuminated the darkness with a blinding high-definition glare. For a split second, there was nothing but the crisp white logo of the Plaza Hotel, but that was instantly replaced by the intimate, unpolished footage of my parents' custom marble kitchen. The image was massive. My father's face was projected 10 feet high, and the sheer scale of the video made his cruel, sneering expression look downright demonic. The technician had followed my instructions perfectly. The audio enhancement software I used was flawless. The background jazz music of the original video was completely muted, pushing my parents' voices to the absolute forefront. When Thomas spoke on the video, his voice echoed off the ballroom walls with a booming, inescapable clarity. "Rebecca is a pathetic failure," the digital version of my father sneered, raising his crystal flute of premium champagne. "At 33, she is still doing freelance data entry. At least she makes Terrence look like a genius." Laughter erupted from the screens. It was the harsh, mocking laughter of Terrence and Samantha synchronized perfectly with the visual of Terrence adjusting his flashy designer suit. Then the video panned slightly, bringing my mother Brenda into sharp focus. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, rolled her eyes, and delivered the line that had set this entire chain of events into motion. "Thank God for Apex Holdings paying off our debts, because that girl is absolutely useless." The contrast between the Thomas standing on the stage preaching about family values and the Thomas on the screen mocking his own daughter was absolutely jarring. The reaction in the room was instantaneous and incredibly physical. A collective sharp gasp rippled through the crowd of 100 wealthy guests. The polite upper-class murmurs vanished entirely, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. You could physically see the shock registering on the faces of the country club elite and the neighborhood association board members. Women in expensive gowns covered their mouths in horror. Men who had just been clapping for my father's heartwarming speech now stared at the screens in utter disbelief. They were witnessing the ugly, rotten core of the family that had spent years parading around as the epitome of suburban perfection. On the stage, the reality of the situation crashed into Thomas like a freight train. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He looked frantically between the giant LED screens and the horrified faces of his friends in the audience. He gripped the edges of his clear acrylic podium so hard his knuckles turned white. He leaned into his microphone, letting out a forced, high-pitched chuckle that sounded like a dying animal. "Well," Thomas stammered, his charismatic voice now cracking with raw panic, "I suppose we all have those moments, do we not? A little family joke taken completely out of context. You know how these private jokes can sound to outsiders. Rebecca always had a very unique sense of humor. This is just a silly little video from Thanksgiving. Please, someone turn that off. Let us get back to the celebration." He waved his hand aggressively toward the audiovisual booth, gesturing for the technician to cut the feed. But the young man at the soundboard simply crossed his arms and looked the other way. The $100 bill was safely in his pocket, and he was clearly enjoying the drama unfolding in front of him. The video did not stop. In fact, it had reached the end of its timeline, but I had intentionally coded the file to loop the most devastating 10 seconds on repeat. The massive screens flashed briefly, and the digital version of my father appeared once again. "Rebecca is a pathetic failure," the booming voice repeated, echoing across the silent ballroom. "At least she makes Terrence look like a genius. Thank God for Apex Holdings paying off our debts, because that girl is absolutely useless." The loop played a second time, then a third. With every repetition, the words hit the audience like physical blows. There was no way for Thomas to spin this as a joke. There was no context that could possibly excuse the pure malice radiating from their faces on the screen. The truth was entirely laid bare. Not only were they horribly abusive to their youngest daughter, but they had also just publicly confessed to being completely broke. My mother had clearly stated on video that an anonymous company called Apex Holdings was paying off their debts. The illusion of their massive self-made wealth was completely shattered in front of the exact people they spent their entire lives trying to impress. I looked over at Brenda. She had taken several steps back from the podium, her hands pressed tightly over her face, as if she could physically block out the shame. Her glittering silver anniversary dress suddenly looked cheap and ridiculous. Down on the ballroom floor, Terence had completely shrunk into himself. His arrogant posture was gone. He was staring at the ground, realizing that his own fake real estate empire was now directly tied to the public humiliation of his in-laws. Samantha was frozen in her chair, her face burning a bright, furious red, unable to look any of her wealthy friends in the eye. Thomas slammed his fist against the podium, abandoning his fake laughter entirely. "Turn it off!" he roared, his voice trembling with sheer rage. "Turn that screen off right now or I will have you fired." I calmly raised my microphone. The speaker screeched slightly before my voice cut through his desperate shouting. "Why do you want to turn it off, Dad?" I asked, my tone dripping with dangerous sweetness. "I thought we were celebrating the family legacy. I thought we were celebrating transparency and hard work. You just told 100 of your closest friends that we have to carry the burden of those who contribute nothing. I just wanted to show them exactly who is carrying whom." The video looped for a fourth time in the background. "Thank God for Apex Holdings paying off our debts." I took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the stage, bringing myself directly under the spotlight. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the guests to fully process the humiliating spectacle they were witnessing. Thomas was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his rented tuxedo. He glared at me with a hatred so pure it could have burned a hole through steel. But I was not afraid of him anymore. He had absolutely zero power over me. "You called me useless," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and commanding. "You stood in a house that I kept from going into foreclosure, drinking champagne that I indirectly paid for, and you laughed at my expense. You told the world I was a failure because I do not wear designer clothes or drive luxury cars. But the funny thing about being a failure is that you learn how to keep incredibly detailed receipts." The crowd leaned in collectively, hanging on to my every word. The shock of the video was just the appetizer. They could sense that the main course was about to be served, and no one dared to look away. I turned my head toward the audiovisual booth one more time and gave the technician a sharp, decisive nod. It was time to show them exactly who Apex Holdings was. I gave the technician the signal. He tapped a key on his laptop, and the humiliating loop of my parents laughing instantly vanished. The massive LED screens flickered and then filled with the bright, sterile white background of an official government website. It was the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry. The text was magnified to an enormous size, making it impossible for anyone in the room to miss the details. I had used a bright yellow digital highlighter over the most important section of the legal document. At the top, the entity name was displayed in bold black lettering, Apex Holdings LLC, and right below that, the registered agent's sole member and chief executive officer, Rebecca. It took about 5 seconds for the reality of those words to fully penetrate the minds of the wealthy guests. When it did, the reaction was a low, sweeping murmur that quickly escalated into a chaotic buzz of disbelief. People were pointing at the screens, whispering frantically to their spouses, and staring at me with a completely new level of reverence and shock. The neighborhood association board members, who had always looked down their noses at my thrift store clothes, were suddenly realizing that I was the phantom billionaire who had effectively been funding their social circle. I turned to look at my father. Thomas was gripping the clear acrylic podium so tightly I thought it might snap. His mouth was opening and closing, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Brenda was clutching her chest, her diamond necklace rising and falling with her erratic, panicked breaths. Down on the floor, Terence had gone completely rigid. I could see the exact moment his brain connected the dots. The mysterious corporate entity that had guaranteed his luxury car lease, the same entity that had brutally repossessed it at the country club in front of his investors, was standing right in front of him holding a microphone. I brought the microphone back to my lips. My voice cut through the chaotic murmurs of the crowd, silencing the room instantly. 5 years ago, I began. My voice was calm, measured, and completely devoid of mercy. 5 years ago, Thomas and Brenda were facing absolute financial ruin. They had recklessly spent their way into a corner, and the bank was preparing to foreclose on their perfect suburban dream. They were terrified of losing their status. They were terrified of losing their precious country club memberships and the admiration of everyone standing in this room tonight. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the crowd of socialites. I knew that if I simply handed them the money, they would bleed me dry and continue treating me like a second-class citizen. So I created Apex Holdings. I bought their debt. I became the anonymous corporate benefactor they thanked in their little video. Thomas shook his head frantically, stepping away from the podium. "No," he whispered hoarsely, his voice carrying just enough to be picked up by his own microphone. "No, that is impossible. You do data entry. You drive a rusted car. I drive a rusted car because I do not need a luxury vehicle to validate my existence, Thomas," I shot back smoothly. "But since we are on the topic of luxury vehicles, let us talk about the family finances. Let us break down exactly what the pathetic failure has been paying for over the last half-decade." I turned toward the audience, treating the ballroom like a corporate boardroom. Over the past 5 years, Apex Holdings has quietly disbursed over $1.5 million to maintain the illusion of this family's wealth. Every single month, I paid the $4,000 mortgage on the house you are currently living in. I paid the exorbitant property taxes. I paid the $800 utility bundles so you could keep the heated swimming pool running all winter. I even paid the monthly dues at the Oakmont Valley Country Club, allowing you to drink premium scotch and pretend you were titans of industry. I shifted my gaze directly to Terrence. He physically flinched under the spotlight. I looked at the brand new gold Rolex on his wrist, and let us not forget the golden child and her incredibly successful husband. I continued, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. When Terrence needed to lease a $100,000 Range Rover to convince his investors he was a real estate mogul, his personal credit was completely worthless. Apex Holdings signed as the silent corporate guarantor. I paid for the car you drove, Terrence. And when you pushed me too far, I was the one who ordered the tow truck to rip it away from you at the valet stand. Samantha let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. The wealthy neighbors sitting at their table actively leaned away from them, treating them like they had a contagious disease. "But the absolute height of your hypocrisy," I said, bringing my focus back to my parents on the stage, "is this very evening. You invited all these wonderful people here to celebrate 35 years of marriage. You wanted to show off. You wanted to prove that you are the elite of Atlanta. You stood up here and bragged about your empire. But let me make this abundantly clear to everyone in this room." I raised my free hand, gesturing to the massive floral centerpieces, the crystal chandeliers, and the elegant catering stations. "I paid for this party. The deposit for the Plaza Hotel Diamond Ballroom was wired from an Apex Holdings corporate account. The champagne you are drinking right now was bought with my money. The string quartet playing in the corner was hired by my executive assistant. Every single bite of food, every single flower, every single perfectly folded linen napkin in this room was provided by the daughter you just called an absolutely useless parasite." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and heavy. Nobody took a sip of their drinks. Nobody touched their food. The guests were completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the deception they had just uncovered. They were attending a luxury gala funded entirely by the victim of the people hosting it. My mother let out a loud, dramatic wail. She finally collapsed to her knees on the stage, her glittering silver dress pooling around her. She reached her hands out toward me, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "Rebecca, please," she sobbed loudly, abandoning all sense of dignity. "We did not know. We did not understand. You have to forgive us. We are your family." I looked down at her, groveling on the carpet. It was a pathetic display, but it was not enough. They had not just insulted me. They had not just used me. They had tried to frame me for a federal felony. The financial humiliation was complete, but the legal execution was just about to begin. I turned my attention back to the audiovisual booth and gave the technician the final signal. It was time to show the crowd exactly how desperate my family had become. Before the technician could execute the next command, a sharp, hysterical scream tore through the heavy silence of the ballroom. It was Samantha. She had leaped up from her chair, knocking her crystal champagne flute onto the carpet, where it shattered into dozens of glittering pieces. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at me from across the room, her face flushed dark red with absolute fury. "You are a liar!" Samantha shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. "You are a disgusting, manipulative liar. You do not own a massive company. You do data entry. If you actually have that kind of money, you stole it. You must have embezzled it from some corporate account and set up a fake LLC to hide your tracks. That is what this is. You are a criminal, Rebecca, and you are just trying to drag our family name through the mud to cover up your own illegal activities." The guests murmured frantically, their heads swiveling back and forth between me on the stage and my sister on the floor, like they were watching an intense tennis match. Samantha took a few steps forward, desperately trying to rally the wealthy crowd to her side. "Think about it," she yelled to the audience, gesturing wildly. "Does she look like a CEO to you? She is just trying to ruin my husband's reputation because she is deeply jealous. She has always been incredibly jealous of Terrence and his massive success." I stood completely still under the bright spotlight, letting her scream herself hoarse. Her absolute dedication to her delusional reality was almost impressive. She was watching her entire world burn to the ground, and her immediate instinct was to accuse me of the exact behavior her husband was actually guilty of. "Jealous of Terrence," I repeated slowly, my voice projecting smoothly and powerfully through the microphone. "That is an incredibly interesting choice of words, Samantha, because I do not think anyone in this beautiful room would ever be jealous of a man facing decades in a federal penitentiary." I turned my head toward the audio-visual booth and gave the young technician a sharp nod. "Next slide, please." The giant LED screens behind me shifted instantly. The Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry disappeared, replaced by a massive, highly detailed screenshot of a formal legal banking document. It was the Small Business Administration commercial loan application. I had used a bright red digital marker to circle 3 very specific areas of the dense document, so the audience could easily follow along with my explanation. Since my sister wants to loudly discuss criminals and embezzlement, I announced, pacing slowly across the front of the stage, "Let us look at some actual federally documented crimes." 2 days ago, my father gave me a strict ultimatum. He told me that if I did not take out a $50,000 personal loan to replace Terrence's repossessed car, I would be entirely disowned by this family. When I did not immediately hand over the cash to fund their lies, my parents and my brother-in-law decided to take matters into their own hands. I raised my free hand and pointed directly at the massive screen behind me. "This is an expedited commercial loan application for $100,000. If you look at the top red circle, you will see the primary applicant is listed as me. It includes my full legal name, my date of birth, and my pristine social security number. But if you look at the second red circle, you will see that the receiving bank account for this massive 6-figure federal loan belongs to a shell company registered entirely to Terrence." The ballroom erupted into loud gasps of sheer horror. The wealthy neighbors who had just been listening to Samantha's frantic accusations now looked at her and Terrence with absolute disgust. Identity theft was a dirty, low-class crime, and doing it to your own flesh and blood was completely unforgivable in their elite social circles. They broke into my old childhood files. I continued, making sure my voice carried clearly over the rising chaos in the room. My mother happily provided my birth certificate. Terrence forged my electronic signature. They actively stole my identity and submitted this fraudulent application to the federal government because they were absolutely desperate for cash to stop the immediate foreclosure on this very house. Thomas stumbled backward on the stage, his face turning an even paler, sickening shade of gray. He reached out with a trembling hand trying to grab the microphone from me, but I simply pulled the heavy metal stand completely out of his reach. But the absolute best part of this document is the digital footprint. I said, my voice rising in intensity and commanding total authority. Because Terrence is not nearly as smart as he pretends to be. When you submit a federal financial document online, the system permanently logs the exact geographic origin of the submission. I pointed to the final red circle at the bottom of the glowing screen. Right there is the IP address tracking log. Let me read it out loud for everyone in the room. 192.168.1.4. I ran a standard trace on that exact address. It does not lead to a corporate real estate office downtown. It pings directly to the wireless internet router located inside the home office of Thomas and Brenda. You committed aggravated federal wire fraud from your own house, Dad. And you left a digital trail a mile wide. The absolute finality of the physical evidence struck the room like a bomb. The document on the screen was completely irrefutable. There was no way to spin it. There was no way to blame a clerical error or claim a simple misunderstanding. Terrence had stolen $100,000, and my parents had actively, willingly helped him do it. Down on the ballroom floor, something inside Terrence finally snapped. The sheer, overwhelming terror of his impending arrest, combined with the absolute public destruction of his fake persona, pushed him right over the edge into pure animalistic panic. He let out a primal, furious roar that violently pierced the air. "Shut up!" Terrence screamed, his face contorted into an ugly mask of pure rage. "Turn that screen off right now!" He shoved a heavy banquet chair completely out of his way, knocking over a tall tray of expensive champagne glasses that shattered loudly against the floor. He charged directly toward the stage like a cornered animal. He was no longer trying to argue his innocence. He was trying to physically silence me. He reached the bottom of the stage stairs in seconds, his hands curling into tight, violent fists, his eyes wild and completely unfocused. He lunged upward, preparing to vault over the steps and tackle me directly to the ground. But I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step back. Before Terrence could even place his expensive leather shoe on the second step, two massive men wearing dark tailored suits stepped out from the deep shadows near the audiovisual booth. I had specifically requested premium, highly trained security for the event when I paid the hotel deposit. They moved with terrifying, brutal speed. The first security guard grabbed Terrence by the collar of his custom tuxedo jacket and yanked him backward with incredible physical force. The second guard tackled him hard around the waist, driving his entire body violently into the carpeted floor of the ballroom. Terrence thrashed wildly, screaming obscenities and kicking his legs, but the heavy guards easily pinned him down, pressing his face directly into the floor. The elegant anniversary party had officially devolved into a complete chaotic crime scene. Guests scrambled backward, pulling their expensive dresses and tuxedo jackets away from the violent physical struggle. Samantha stood completely frozen in place, watching her husband wrestle with hotel security on the ground, the realization finally hitting her that this nightmare was entirely real. I stood calmly on the stage, the microphone still resting easily in my hand, looking down at the absolute wreckage of their lives. Terrence was completely immobilized, his cheek pressed forcefully into the expensive hotel carpet by the heavy hands of my private security detail. Samantha was frozen a few feet away, her hands hovering near her face in a state of pure shock. Thomas and Brenda were trapped on the stage with me, breathless and pale, utterly stripped of their carefully constructed suburban royalty. The ballroom was trapped in a suffocating silence, interrupted only by the ragged, desperate sound of Terrence trying to catch his breath against the floor. Then a loud, sharp noise shattered the quiet. The massive mahogany double doors at the main entrance of the Diamond Ballroom swung open with tremendous force, hitting the brass wall stops with a resounding crack. Every single head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Two men wearing dark, tactical windbreakers stepped over the threshold. Across the back of their jackets, the bright yellow letters FBI were printed in bold, unmistakable font. They were flanked by 4 local uniformed police officers, their hands resting cautiously near their duty belts. They did not look like they were there to attend a luxury anniversary gala. They moved with a chilling, synchronized purpose, their heavy boots thudding against the plush carpet, completely ignoring the opulent floral arrangements and the crystal chandeliers overhead. Brenda, still operating under the delusion of her own immense privilege, scrambled to her feet. She smoothed down the front of her glittering silver dress, her mind frantically trying to spin the situation. She actually believed the authorities were there to rescue her from the nightmare I had created. She rushed down the stage stairs and ran directly toward the approaching agents, waving her manicured hands in the air. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," Brenda cried out, slipping instantly into her refined, authoritative country club voice. "My daughter is having a severe mental breakdown. She is displaying a fraudulent presentation on those screens, and she hired these thugs to assault my son-in-law. You need to arrest her immediately and clear this room." The lead federal agent did not even break his stride. He did not offer her a polite smile or ask for her statement. He looked at her with the cold, detached expression of a man who dealt with real criminals every single day. "Ma'am, step aside right now," he commanded, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. Brenda gasped, deeply offended by his complete lack of deference to her social standing. "But do you not know who we are?" she protested, reaching out to touch his arm. The agent effortlessly stepped around her, leaving her standing entirely alone in the middle of the aisle. The team of officers marched directly to the front of the stage, stopping right where Terrence was pinned to the floor. The lead agent reached into his pocket, pulled out a leather wallet, and flashed a heavy gold badge. He looked at my 2 private security guards and gave a short, sharp nod. "Federal agents," the man stated clearly. "We will take it from here. Release him." The security guards immediately stepped back, lifting their weight off Terrence. For a brief second, Terrence stayed flat on the floor, breathing heavily, his custom designer tuxedo completely wrinkled and covered in carpet lint. Then 2 of the uniformed police officers reached down, grabbed him by the arms, and hauled him roughly to his feet. Terrence looked absolutely terrible. The arrogant, smooth-talking real estate mogul was entirely gone. His face was flushed and streaked with tears. Snot was running from his nose. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting from the officers to his wife, to the audience of wealthy neighbors who were currently recording the entire ordeal on their cell phones. "Terrence, you are officially under arrest," the lead FBI agent announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. "You are being charged with federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft under United States Code Title 18. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." One of the police officers pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. He grabbed Terrence by the wrist, forcing his arm behind his back. The cold metal clicked sharply into place, locking directly next to the brand-new solid gold Rolex Terrence had purchased with my stolen identity just hours prior. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut seemed to break whatever fragile psychological barrier Terrence had left. His knees instantly buckled. If the 2 officers had not been holding him up by his arms, he would have collapsed right back onto the floor. He began to cry loudly, his broad shoulders shaking with heavy, pathetic sobs. "No, please." Terrence begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You do not understand. I did not mean to do it. It was a mistake. I have the money. Just let me call the bank. I will give it all back right now. Please do not put me in jail." "You cannot give back money from a frozen account," the FBI agent replied coldly. "Now walk." As the officers turned him toward the exit, Terrence looked over his shoulder. He made direct eye contact with my parents, who were standing frozen on the edge of the stage. A dark, desperate realization washed over his tear-stained face. He was going to federal prison, and he was absolutely refusing to go down alone. He had zero loyalty to the family that had just sheltered him. "Wait!" Terrence screamed, digging the heels of his expensive Italian loafers into the carpet to stop the officers from dragging him away. "Wait. I did not do it alone. It was not just me." The FBI agent paused, raising an eyebrow. "Are you making a statement?" he asked. "Yes!" Terrence shouted hysterically, violently, thrusting his chin toward Thomas and Brenda. "They made me do it. I just wanted a small loan for a car, but they needed the cash to save this house from foreclosure. Brenda went into the filing cabinet. She gave me the birth certificate. Thomas gave me her social security number. They stood right behind me in the home office and told me exactly how to forge the digital signature. They are the ones who planned the whole thing. Arrest them too. They are part of it. A collective gasp of absolute horror ripped through the wealthy crowd. It was one thing to be broke, but it was another entirely to throw your own child under the bus to commit federal fraud. Brenda let out a piercing shriek covering her ears, as if the physical act could block out his confession. Thomas went completely rigid, his mouth falling open in sheer terror. "Terrence, shut your mouth right now!" Thomas roared, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and absolute fear. "You lying piece of garbage, how dare you accuse us?" "I did exactly what you told me to do," Terrence sobbed loudly, tears streaming down his face as the police officers finally began dragging him down the center aisle. "You said she was just a useless data entry clerk and she would never find out. You said she owed us. You promised I would not get caught. Tell them the truth, Thomas. Tell them you gave me the number." His voice faded into a pathetic, desperate wail as the heavy mahogany doors closed firmly behind him, shutting him out of the ballroom and out of polite society forever. The FBI agent did not leave with the rest of the officers. Instead, he pulled a small black notepad from his pocket and slowly walked up the stage stairs, his eyes locked entirely on my terrified parents. "Well," the agent said calmly, clicking his pen, "it sounds like we are going to need to add federal conspiracy charges to the file. Thomas and Brenda, you are both going to need to come down to the field office with me right now for formal questioning." The trap had not just caught the rat, it had successfully captured the entire infestation. The heavy mahogany doors clicked completely shut, sealing Terrence out of the ballroom and finalizing his descent into the federal justice system. The faint echo of his desperate wails lingered in the hallway for a few seconds before fading into total silence. Inside the diamond ballroom, the atmosphere was thick and utterly suffocating. The string quartet had completely abandoned their instruments. The catering staff stood frozen by the buffet tables. 100 of Atlanta's most elite suburbanites were collectively holding their breath, their cell phones still raised, capturing every single second of the catastrophic downfall of the family that had once reigned supreme over their exclusive country club. Down on the floor, the illusion of the golden child shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Samantha, who had spent her entire adult life parading around in designer clothes and judging everyone she deemed beneath her, finally collapsed. Her knees buckled, and she dropped heavily to the carpet. Her expensive silk dress bunched up awkwardly around her legs. She did not scream or yell at me this time. She just wept. It was a deep, guttural sobbing that shook her entire frame. She buried her face in her hands, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her shaking shoulders. The wealthy neighbors she had spent years trying to impress actually took physical steps backward, forming a wide circle of pure isolation around her. Nobody rushed to comfort her. Nobody offered her a handkerchief. She was the wife of a confessed federal criminal, and in their world that made her completely toxic. On the stage, the reality of the FBI agent's words had finally penetrated the thick layer of arrogance surrounding my parents. The agent did not immediately place them in handcuffs. Instead, he pulled 2 crisp white business cards from his pocket, handed them to a nearby police officer, and instructed him to escort Thomas and Brenda to the unmarked vehicles waiting by the service exit. The agent gave them exactly 2 minutes to collect themselves while he stepped aside to speak into his shoulder radio. Those 2 minutes were all my parents needed to realize the absolute terrifying gravity of their situation. The foreclosure notice was no longer their biggest problem. They were facing federal conspiracy charges. The house, the cars, the country club memberships, none of it mattered if they were sitting in a prison cell. They turned their heads slowly, looking out at the sea of disgusted faces in the audience. They saw the judgment. They saw the cameras recording their humiliation. Their social empire was completely dead. Then their eyes slowly drifted back to me. I was still standing perfectly still under the bright stage lights, the midnight blue silk of my gown practically glowing against the dark background. I held the microphone at my side, my expression completely blank. In that moment, a desperate, frantic calculation crossed my father's face. He realized that the daughter he had spent 33 years calling a pathetic failure was now the most powerful person in the entire room. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar financial holding firm. I had the capital to hire the best defense attorneys in the country. I had the liquid cash to pay off the bank, stop the foreclosure, and somehow make this entire nightmare disappear. The transformation was immediate and incredibly grotesque. Thomas and Brenda did not walk toward me. They rushed me. They scrambled across the stage like desperate drowning animals clawing for a life raft. Brenda reached me first. She threw her arms out, her manicured fingers digging violently into the bare skin of my forearm. Her face was streaked with black mascara, her eyes wide and bloodshot with pure terror. "Rebecca, please," Brenda wailed, her voice cracking and completely devoid of its usual refined polish. "You have to stop this. Tell that agent it was a mistake. Tell him you gave Terrence permission to use the number. We are your family. We are blood. You cannot let them take us away in front of all our friends." Thomas grabbed my other arm, his heavy hands shaking uncontrollably against the expensive fabric of my sleeve. His charismatic posture was entirely broken. He was hunched over his chest, heaving his face slick with cold sweat. "You have enough money to save us," he pleaded, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper. "You own the company. You can cancel the foreclosure right now. You can pay off the stolen money. Please, Becca, I am begging you. You cannot let them take our house. You cannot let them destroy our legacy. We will do anything. We will treat you better. Just write the check and make this stop." They were clinging to my arms, their heavy, panicked breathing filling the space between us. It was the ultimate display of their absolute moral bankruptcy. Even now, facing federal criminal charges and the complete destruction of their lives, their primary concern was keeping their mansion and preserving their fake legacy. They were not apologizing for abusing me. They were not apologizing for stealing my identity. They were only apologizing because they had finally been caught and they wanted me to buy their way out of the consequences. I looked down at their hands gripping my arms. I felt the desperate pressure of their fingers against my skin. For 33 years I had craved their approval. I had endured their endless insults, their cruel jokes, and their blatant favoritism just to catch a fleeting glimpse of parental affection. I had funded their lavish lifestyle in secret, hoping that keeping them comfortable would somehow bring us peace. But looking at them now weeping and begging on the stage they had rented to publicly shame me, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no pity, no lingering sense of daughterly obligation. The emotional cord connecting me to these people had been entirely severed. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply reached over with my free hand and firmly grabbed my father's thick wrist. With a slow, deliberate, and incredibly cold motion, I peeled his trembling fingers completely off the sleeve of my gown. He gasped, his eyes widening in shock as I forcefully pushed his hand away. I turned to my mother. She tried to tighten her grip on my forearm, her sharp nails digging into my skin, but I showed her the exact same complete lack of mercy. I grabbed her hand, twisted it sharply, and shoved it away, stepping back so they were both completely disconnected from me. They stumbled slightly, their hands falling uselessly to their sides. They stared at me, their faces twisted in absolute disbelief. They could not comprehend that the quiet, submissive girl they had bullied for decades was currently standing her ground, completely unaffected by their ultimate begging. They expected me to cave under the pressure of the word family, but they had fundamentally forgotten that they were the ones who taught me family meant absolutely nothing when money was on the line. I stepped back, creating a deliberate physical distance between myself and the two people who had brought me into this world. Thomas and Brenda stood there, their arms hanging limply at their sides, staring at me with hollow, desperate eyes. They looked like strangers. The polished, arrogant couple that had confidently taken the stage just 20 minutes ago was entirely gone. In their place stood two terrified, broken frauds who had finally run out of other people's money to spend. The lead FBI agent stood patiently at the bottom of the stage stairs. He did not rush me. He crossed his arms over his tactical windbreaker, watching the scene unfold with a quiet, observant respect. He knew I was the victim in this massive federal case, and he was giving me the floor to deliver my final verdict before he hauled them off to a cold interrogation room. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. 100 wealthy socialites, the very people my parents had worshipped and sacrificed their own daughter to impress, stood frozen among the scattered dining tables waiting for my next move. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My hand was perfectly steady. My voice, when it echoed through the massive diamond ballroom, was devoid of any anger, sorrow, or hesitation. It was the cold, clinical voice of a chief executive officer terminating a deeply toxic contract. "You spent my entire life telling me exactly what I was," I said, looking directly into my father's pale, sweating face. "You made sure I knew my place in this family. When I was a child, you told me I was a disappointment. When I became an adult, you told me I was a burden. You invited all your high society friends to this lavish party tonight, and you stood behind that acrylic podium, and you told them all that you had to carry the dead weight of those who contribute absolutely nothing to the family empire." Thomas shook his head weakly, a fresh wave of panicked tears spilling over his cheeks. "No, Rebecca," he croaked, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "I did not mean it. I was just talking. We were just trying to look successful for the board members. We are your parents. You know we love you." I ignored his pathetic begging and turned my cold gaze to my mother. She was shivering in her expensive silver dress, her makeup running in dark, ugly streaks down her face, ruining her perfect facade. "And you," I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy silence like a razor. "You stood in the custom kitchen of a house I secretly paid for drinking premium champagne I bought, and you looked right into a camera and called me a pathetic failure. You said I was absolutely useless. You called me a parasite who infected this family with a poverty mindset. You both decided that my only value in this world was my pristine credit score, which you happily handed over to a con artist to save your precious country club memberships." Brenda let out a sharp, breathless sob, burying her face in her trembling hands. I let the weight of their own cruel words hang in the air for a long moment, making sure every single guest in the room absorbed the absolute depravity of their actions. I looked at the giant LED screens behind me, which were still displaying the irrefutable digital proof of their federal crimes. Then I looked back at my parents. "For 33 years I fought to prove you wrong," I said, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register. "I hid my massive success because I wanted you to love me for me, not for my bank account. I paid your bills in secret because I wanted to save you from your own reckless greed. I kept trying to be the good daughter, hoping that one day you would look at me with the same pride and adoration you reserved for Terrence and Samantha. But I am entirely done fighting. I am done trying to prove my worth to people who possess absolutely none." I paused, taking one final deep breath of the crisp hotel air. "You called me a pathetic failure," I stated clearly, the microphone picking up every crisp syllable. "You said I was a parasite. Well, I have thought about it, and I am simply agreeing with you." Thomas gasped loudly, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror, as the true meaning of my words washed over him. "I am accepting the exact role you gave me," I continued, my voice echoing like thunder across the room. "A useless failure does not have the means to pay off $1 million mortgage. A parasite does not have the capital to fund a high-powered federal criminal defense team. So from this exact moment on, you will never see another dime from me. My corporate accounts are permanently sealed to you. My personal phone number is disconnected. The leniency period is officially over. The foreclosure on your home proceeds tomorrow morning at 9:00 sharp." "No!" Brenda shrieked, collapsing back onto her knees and grabbing handfuls of her own hair. "Rebecca, no, you cannot do this to us. The bank will take everything. Where will we go? What will we do?" I looked down at her, feeling a profound, beautiful sense of closure. "You can do whatever you want, Mother," I replied softly, "but you will do it without me. I reached over to the clear acrylic podium and set the microphone down gently on the surface. The heavy thud of the metal against the plastic signaled the absolute end of the conversation. I did not wait for the FBI agent to walk up the stairs. I did not wait to watch the local police officers put my parents in heavy steel handcuffs. I simply turned my back on them forever. I walked to the edge of the stage and gracefully descended the carpeted steps, my midnight blue silk gown gliding effortlessly behind me. As I stepped onto the ballroom floor, an incredible thing happened. The dense crowd of wealthy neighbors, country club presidents, and local socialites immediately parted. They stepped back, clearing a wide, unobstructed path directly to the mahogany exit doors. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody offered a single word of criticism or judgment. They looked at me with a mixture of absolute awe and sheer terror. As I walked down the makeshift aisle, the suffocating silence of the room finally broke. It did not break with sympathy for my parents. It broke with the vicious, buzzing sound of high society gossip. The very people my parents had bankrupted themselves to impress were now turning on them like a pack of starving wolves. I could hear the harsh whispers echoing through the crowd. I heard a prominent neighborhood association board member mention calling an emergency meeting to expedite their removal from the subdivision. I heard another wealthy guest laughing cruelly about Terrence and his fake luxury portfolio. I glanced over my shoulder one last time before reaching the grand doors. The stage was a picture of absolute devastation. The federal agents had finally moved in, officially reading Thomas and Brenda their Miranda rights while they sobbed hysterically on the floor. Down in the crowd, the guests had their smartphones raised high in the air, recording every miserable second of my parents being publicly humiliated and escorted away in total disgrace. The bright flashes of their phone cameras illuminated the dark ballroom, capturing the total, undeniable collapse of their fake empire. I turned forward, pushed open the heavy mahogany doors, and walked out into the cool, quiet hallway of the hotel lobby. I left them behind to face the absolute ruin of their own making, stepping confidently into a bright future that was finally completely mine. 3 months passed since the night of the anniversary party, and the dust finally settled over the absolute wreckage of their lives. I kept my promise to the exact minute. At 9 o'clock the morning after the disastrous gala, the legal division of Apex Holdings officially executed the final foreclosure documents. There were no extensions, no grace periods, and absolutely no secret bailouts. The sprawling $1.2 million suburban home, the ultimate symbol of my parents' fake success, was seized and immediately put up for public auction. It sold in under 20 minutes to a corporate developer who planned to gut the entire interior. The eviction process was swift and entirely merciless. I was not there to see it, but Aunt Carol told me that 2 county sheriff deputies arrived at the property to physically escort Thomas and Brenda off the premises. They were forced to pack whatever clothes they could fit into black plastic trash bags, while the same wealthy neighbors they had tried to impress watched the entire humiliating spectacle from their perfectly manicured lawns. Today my parents are living a reality they once considered a fate worse than death. With their credit completely destroyed, and a pending federal conspiracy indictment hanging over their heads, no reputable management company would rent to them. They were forced to move into a cramped, aggressively moldy one-bedroom apartment on the extreme bad side of town. The building sits next to a noisy industrial park. The elegant scent of Brenda's signature designer perfume has been entirely replaced by the permanent stench of damp mildew, cheap cooking oil, and stale cigarette smoke that seeps through the thin peeling walls. There are no crystal chandeliers or marble countertops. Brenda spends her days sitting on a heavily stained secondhand sofa, drinking cheap instant coffee from a chipped mug, staring blankly at a small television they bought at a pawn shop. Thomas is a completely broken man. His charismatic country club persona evaporated the second his bank accounts were frozen. He spends his afternoons desperately scrolling through his phone, trying to contact his former golf buddies and business associates to ask for personal loans or legal favors. Every single one of them has blocked his number. The Oakmont Valley Country Club, formally revoked their membership the morning after the FBI raided the anniversary party, issuing a massive, highly public ban. My parents are absolute pariahs. They cannot walk into a grocery store or a local pharmacy in their old neighborhood without people pointing, whispering, and quickly walking in the opposite direction. The crushing weight of their mounting legal fees has completely drowned them. They are trapped in a miserable, squalid little box, spending every waking moment blaming each other for the sheer greed that destroyed their lives. Samantha suffered an equally spectacular fall from grace. When Terrence was arrested, the federal government immediately froze all of their joint checking and savings accounts pending the fraud investigation. She lost access to the stolen money, the credit cards, and the luxury lifestyle she had built her entire identity around. Without the phantom income to support her, she was evicted from her high-end downtown rental within 4 weeks. She tried to move in with Thomas and Brenda, but their tiny, moldy apartment simply did not have the space, and the screaming matches between the three of them became so violent that the landlord threatened to call the police. To survive, the golden child was forced to do something she had actively avoided her entire adult life. She had to get a real job. Samantha now works the grueling overnight shift as a cashier at a massive 24-hour discount retail chain. The girl who used to mock my thrift store winter coats and brag about handing down her designer dresses is now forced to wear a stiff, cheap polyester uniform vest over a faded polo shirt. She stands on her feet for 9 hours straight, under harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights, scanning discounted groceries and cheap household goods for minimum wage. Her perfect blonde hair is constantly tied back in a messy, exhausted ponytail, and her manicured nails are chipped and broken from breaking down cardboard boxes in the stockroom. Last week, Aunt Carol heard that 2 of Samantha's former wealthy friends from the Homeowners Association walked into the store late at night to buy emergency cold medicine. They walked right up to Samantha's register. They did not say a word to her. They just looked at her cheap uniform, paid for their items, and offered her a look of devastating, absolute pity before walking out. Samantha cried in the employee break room for the rest of her shift. And then there is Terrence. The arrogant, fast-talking fake real estate mogul did not get to return to his tailored suits or his high-end luxury vehicles. Because he was facing serious federal charges and had actively demonstrated a willingness to commit wire fraud across state lines, the judge deemed him a severe flight risk. He was denied bail. For the past 3 months, Terrence has been sitting inside a bleak maximum security federal detention center, awaiting his official trial. His massive fake empire has been reduced to an 8x10 concrete cell, a thin mattress on a metal cot, and a bright orange jumpsuit. The man who wore a solid gold Rolex and bragged about closing million-dollar deals now has to ask a heavily armed guard for permission to use the bathroom. His court-appointed public defender has already told him that the physical evidence provided by Apex Holdings, including the IP address tracking log and the forged electronic signatures, is absolutely bulletproof. The federal prosecutors are not offering any lenient plea deals. They are pushing for the maximum sentence. Terrence is currently facing 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. According to the recorded prison phone calls obtained by the legal team, Terrence spends his allotted 15 minutes of phone time sobbing to anyone who will accept the collect call, violently blaming Samantha and my parents for forcing him to steal my identity. They are all trapped in their own personal hells. They have lost their homes, their freedom, their reputations, and their sanity. They turned on each other the second the money dried up, proving that their supposed family loyalty was nothing but a transactional illusion. They gambled everything they had on the assumption that I was too weak to fight back, and they lost absolutely everything in the process. I stood leaning against the thick glass railing of my newly purchased penthouse balcony, letting the warm morning sun wash over my face. The sprawling Atlanta skyline stretched out in front of me, a breathtaking sea of towering glass and steel glittering in the early light. The air up here was clean and quiet, completely removed from the noise and chaos of the streets below. For 5 years, I had confined myself to a tiny, dimly lit apartment with cracked linoleum floors and peeling paint, playing the role of the impoverished data entry clerk to keep my toxic family at bay. But that chapter of my life was permanently closed. I was finally allowing myself to enjoy the fruits of my own relentless hard work. The penthouse was a physical manifestation of my freedom. It was expansive, beautifully designed, and most importantly, it was paid for entirely in cash. There were no hidden loans, no secret corporate guarantors, and absolutely no strings attached. I turned around and looked back into the massive open concept living room. Aunt Carol was sitting comfortably on a plush, cream-colored sofa, her feet tucked beneath a soft cashmere throw blanket. She was holding a steaming mug of premium dark roast coffee, completely engrossed in a novel she had just bought. She looked peaceful, completely unburdened by the relentless drama that had consumed the rest of her relatives. When the federal investigation tore through my parents' lives, Aunt Carol had been the only one who stood her ground, refusing to lie for them or cover up their crimes. She had proven that true family loyalty was not about enabling toxic behavior, but about standing up for what was right. I had moved her into the guest suite of the penthouse last month, ensuring she would never have to worry about her own retirement or rely on the charity of people like Thomas and Brenda. She looked up from her book, caught me watching her, and offered a warm, genuine smile. There was no hidden agenda in her expression. There was no silent calculation about what she could extract from me. It was just pure unconditional love. Earlier this morning, I received a secure email from the federal bank fraud investigator I had worked with. He wanted to personally inform me that Terrence had formally accepted a binding plea agreement to avoid a prolonged public trial. He admitted to all charges of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. In exchange for his full cooperation, the federal prosecutors dropped the maximum penalty down to a guaranteed 7 years in a federal prison, followed by a decade of heavily supervised probation. The email also confirmed that Thomas and Brenda were officially indicted on felony conspiracy charges. They surrendered their passports and are currently awaiting trial while trapped in that miserable, moldy apartment on the bad side of town. The legal loop was completely closed. The threat they posed was permanently neutralized. They will spend the rest of their natural lives paying for the massive deceit they orchestrated, completely isolated from the luxury world they once ruled. Aunt Carol set her book down on the glass coffee table and walked out onto the balcony to join me. She leaned against the railing, taking a deep breath of the fresh morning air. "It is incredibly quiet up here," she said softly, her eyes scanning the distant horizon. I nodded, agreeing with her completely. "It is the best kind of quiet," I replied. Aunt Carol looked at me, her expression turning serious for a brief moment. "You did the right thing, Rebecca," she told me, her voice filled with absolute certainty. "You gave them every chance to be a real family. You protected them when they did not deserve it, and they repaid you with the ultimate betrayal. Do not ever let anyone make you feel guilty for finally choosing yourself." I listened to her words, letting them sink deep into my heart. She was absolutely right. There was zero guilt left in my system. The journey from being the family scapegoat to standing on this balcony had been incredibly painful, but it was entirely necessary. For decades, society had conditioned me to believe that blood ties were an unbreakable contract. We are taught to forgive and forget, to turn the other cheek, and to constantly make excuses for the people who share our DNA. But the brutal reality is that blood does not excuse abuse. Sharing a last name does not give anyone the right to systematically destroy your mental health or steal your identity. My parents and my sister had weaponized the concept of family to drain me dry. They had demanded respect while offering absolutely none in return. I realized that financial independence is the ultimate shield against toxic people. Money cannot buy happiness, but it absolutely buys freedom. It buys the ability to walk away from a dinner table where you are being disrespected. It buys the power to hire elite legal counsel when someone tries to frame you for a federal crime. It buys the absolute security of knowing that you will never have to depend on someone who actively wants to see you fail. By building Apex Holdings in secret, I had constructed an impenetrable fortress around myself. When they finally tried to strike their lethal blow, their weapons shattered against the walls I had built. I did not just survive their betrayal. I orchestrated their absolute downfall using the very system they tried to manipulate. The air felt lighter now. The heavy, suffocating weight of my parents' expectations was completely gone. I no longer had to monitor my speech, hide my nice things, or pretend to be less than I was, just to make them feel comfortable in their own mediocrity. Apex Holdings was expanding into new corporate territories, my personal portfolio was thriving, and I was finally living completely in the light. The fear that had defined my early 20s was replaced by a cold, unyielding confidence. I knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly what I was capable of achieving. The pathetic failure they had mocked in that Thanksgiving video was nothing but a ghost. Sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to buy the board and kick the players off. Have you ever had to use the law to cut off toxic family members? Let me know your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of sweet justice.